The Bookish Life of Nina Hill. By Abbi Waxman. 1. In which we meet our heroine and witness a crime of thoughtlessness. Imagine you're a bird. You can be any kind of bird, but those of you who've chosen ostrich or chicken are going to struggle to keep up. Now, imagine you're coasting through the skies above Los Angeles, coughing occasionally in the smog. Shiny ribbons of traffic spangle below you, and in the distance you see an impossibly verdant patch, like a green darn in a grey sock. As you get closer, the patch resolves into a cross-hatching of old houses and streets, and you have reached Larchmont. Congratulations, you've discovered a secret not even all Angelenos know. It's a neighborhood like any other, but it boasts a forest of trees, planted generously along semi-winding streets that look like they were lifted wholesale from a Capra movie, and were actually all planted at once in the 1920s. The houses are big but not showy, set back with front gardens that make the streets seem even wider than they are. Even today, most of the houses look the way they always have, thanks to historical preservation and a general consensus that the whole thing is hella cute. The trees have grown into truly beautiful examples of their kind. Magnolias drift the streets with perfume, cedars strew them with russet needle carpets, and oaks make street cleaning and alternate side parking a necessity. Larchmont Boulevard is the linear heart of Larchmont Village, populated by cafes, restaurants, boutiques, artisanal stores of many kinds, and one of the few remaining independent bookstores in Los Angeles. That's where Nina Lee Hill works, spinster of this parish and heroine both of her own life and the book you're holding in your lovely hand. Knight's has been in business since 1940, and though its fortunes have risen and fallen over time, a genuine love of books and a thorough knowledge of its customers have kept it in business. It is like all good independent bookstores should be, owned and staffed by people who love books, read them, think about them, and sell them to other people who feel the same way. There is reading hour for little kids. There are visiting authors. There are free bookmarks. It's really a paradise on earth, if paradise for you smells of paper and paste. It does for Nina, but as our story opens, she would happily go back to the part where we were all being birds, and poop on the head of the woman in front of her. The woman was staring at Nina in what can only be described as a truculent fashion, jangling her extensive, culturally appropriative turquoise jewelry. I want my money back. It's a very boring book, all they do is sit around and talk. She took a breath and delivered the coup de grace. I don't know why the manager told me it was a classic. Nina looked around for Liz Quinn, the guilty party. She could hear the distant rustling of washable silk as Liz went to ground in the young adult section. Snipe. Nina breathed in hate and breathed out love. She smiled at the customer. Did you read it all the way through? The woman didn't smile back. Of course. Not a quitter, just a whiner. Well, then we can't refund your money. Nina curled her toes inside their fluffy socks. The customer couldn't see that, of course, and Nina sincerely hoped she looked calm and resolute. Why not? The customer was short, but she managed to draw herself up a couple of inches. All that Pilates finally paying off. Nina was firm. Because we sold you a book and you read it. That's pretty much the whole life cycle of bookstores right there. If you didn't enjoy it, I'm very sorry, but we can't do anything about it. She looked down at the book on the counter. You really didn't like it? It's generally considered one of the greatest novels of all time. Nina resisted the impulse to pull out her imaginary blaster and blow the woman's head off, and got a microflash of the bit in Terminator 2. Where his silvery head splits in the middle and waves about. Liz was always telling her to be warmer toward the customers, and to remember they could go online and buy any book on the planet faster than Knights could order it. Nina needed to make it a friendly and personal experience, so they liked her enough to give the store A, more money and B, more time than they had to give that other place. Independent booksellers called it the river, so as to avoid saying it out loud. But as Nina often thought, denial ain't just a river in South America. The woman made a face. I don't know why. The heroine sits around and gazes out of the window. If I spent all my time sitting on my butt pondering life, I assure you I wouldn't be as successful as I am. She shook back her long blonde hair, with its carefully casual beachy waves, and had another thought. If I don't like the food at a restaurant, I can send it back and get a refund. Not if you've eaten it. Nina was confident on this one. Can I get a store credit at least? Nina shook her head. No, but may I suggest a library card? At a library you can borrow the book, read it, and give it back totally free of charge. She forced a smile. There are actually 2 within walking distance of here. She was sure Liz would be happy to lose this customer. Pretty sure. Walking? Nina sighed. There's parking at both. She slid the book back across the counter. This is still yours. Maybe you could try it again sometime. I've read it about 20 times, actually. This was a gross understatement, but Nina didn't want to blow what was left of the customer's mind. The woman frowned at her. Why? She looked Nina up and down, not unkindly, just trying to work out why someone would do something so strange. Nina was wearing a pale green vintage cardigan over a blue dress, with a cardigan clip across the collar. Apparently, this clarified things for the customer, because the woman's expression softened to sympathy. I guess if you've got a boring life, other people's boring lives are reassuring. Nina stepped on her own foot and seethed as the woman dropped Pride and Prejudice carelessly into her fancy handbag, bending the cover and dinging the pages. 2 minutes later, Liz appeared over the top of the graphic novel's shelf. Is she gone? Nina nodded, viciously tidying a pile of bookmarks and trying to forget the callous book treatment she had just witnessed. You're a craven coward, and wouldn't even emerge to defend your second favorite 19th century writer. For shame. Liz shrugged. Ms. Austen needs no defense. You did fine, and besides, I've never forgotten a long conversation I had with that particular customer about LSD and the boundaries of consciousness. She straightened some copies of Roller Girl. I thought I was asking about her vacation, but it turned out she'd stayed home and gone further than she ever thought possible. She tipped her head down to peer at Nina over her glasses. Liz's short, dark hair barely touched with grey, despite the several careers she'd had, and the many cities and lives she'd been part of. There was a long portion about the deep inner beauty of yogurt when viewed through the lens of hallucinogens that put me off your plate for life. Nina regarded her carefully. I find that story almost impossible to believe. Liz turned and walked toward nonfiction. I should hope so, seeing as I completely made it up. Nina looked down and smiled. She'd never felt more at home than she did at nights, with the plentiful sarcasm and soothing rows of book spines. It was heaven on earth. Now, if they could only get rid of the customers and lock the front doors, they'd really be onto something. As the only child of a single mother, Nina's natural state was solitude. Growing up, she saw other people with fathers and brothers and sisters, and it looked like fun, but generally, she thought she was better off without a crowd. That might be overstating it. Sometimes she ached for them, especially in middle school. There were lots of kids who had older brothers or sisters in the high school, and those kids had a protective glow around them she envied. Older siblings would wave at recess, or even stop by to chat and confer greatness. Then, in high school, Nina would listen to the kids with younger siblings complain about them but wave, or go over and chat. She saw the relationship, the shared address, and wondered about it. Nina's mother had her after a very brief liaison with some guy she met in those strange times before Google, 1988 BG, where all you had to go on was what someone told you in person. Nina often shook her head over the crazy risks those Gen Xers took. No online database of criminal records, no checking social media for wives and children, no reading back through months of feeds looking for clues. They would have to physically talk to a stranger without knowing any backstory. They could pretend to be a whole new person for everyone they met, without the effort of creating a matching online profile. The potential for dishonesty and deceit was shocking. Anyway, Nina's mom wasn't even sure of the guy's name, and wasn't worried about it. She was a news photographer. She traveled the world and took lovers whenever they presented themselves, without guilt or complications. "I knew I wanted you," she would say to Nina. "God only knows if I would have wanted him." At first, Candice had taken Nina everywhere with her, carrying her under one arm and putting her to bed in hotel room drawers. After a year or two, Nina got inconveniently big and wriggly, though, so Candice found a nice apartment in LA, and an even nicer nanny, and left Nina to get on with the business of growing up. She'd show up 3 or 4 times a year, bringing gifts and strange candy and smelling of airports. Nina had never really gotten to know her, though Candice had loomed large in the child's imagination. When Nina first read Ballet Shoes, as a child, she'd realized her mother was Great-Uncle Matthew. Her nanny, Louise, had been a wonderful parent, funny and interested and bookish, loving and gentle. She'd created a peaceful life for Nina, and when she'd come to Nina's college graduation, she'd hugged her, cried a little, then moved back south to help her own older daughters raise their children. Nina had been far more devastated by Louise's departure than she'd ever been waving goodbye to her own mother. Candice had started the race, but Louise had carried Nina over the finish line. Nina hadn't missed her mother as much as she'd missed having a father. She wasn't entirely sure what fathers actually did, day to day, but she'd seen them standing on the sidelines at Pee Wee soccer, or showing up at the end of the school day with their hands in their pockets. In middle school, they'd become totally invisible, but then in high school they'd reappeared, driving the car for late-night pickups and avoiding everyone's eye when a crowd of teenage girls piled in, smelling of drugstore body sprays and showing liberal amounts of nascent cleavage. Nina found them mysterious. Visiting other people's houses, she would see their moms often, in fact, become friendly with their moms, but she left high school without ever truly getting the point of dads. They were a nice bonus, like a pool, or a cute dog, or a natural predisposition to clear skin. "So, what's tonight?" asked Liz. "Delicate Ladies Book Club. Transgender Support Bridge Night. Decapage Devils." "You think you're very funny," replied Nina, "but truthfully, you're just jealous I have a wide variety of activities to keep my mind alive." "My mind needs no encouragement," said Liz. "In fact, I'm taking up hard drugs in the hope of killing off some brain cells and leveling the brain-body playing field." This was actually true for Nina, too. Not the hard drugs, but the part about her mind needing no encouragement. As a child she'd been told she had ADD, or ADHD, or some other acronym, but her school librarian had simply clicked her tongue and told her she was imaginative and creative and couldn't be expected to wait for everyone else to catch up. She'd started giving Nina extra books to read and encyclopedias to gnaw on. This approach, Nina now realized, was in no way medically recommended, and didn't do anything at all for her math skills, but it did mean she arrived in high school having read more than anyone else, including the teachers. It also meant she thought of books as medication and sanctuary and the source of all good things. Nothing yet had proven her wrong. Nina eyed her boss. "Tonight is trivia night." She knew Liz wanted to join her trivia team but couldn't work up the energy for the required late nights and weekly study sessions. "They didn't ban you yet? I thought they were going to ban you for winning all the time." "They did ban us from one place, but there are plenty of bars where they've never heard of us." Liz raised her eyebrows. "You're a trivia hustler." Nina shrugged. "Living the gangster dream." Liz looked at her. "Go on. Do it." Nina shook her head. "Please." Nina sighed. "You have to give me a category." "Marine life." "Too easy. 100-pound octopus can squeeze through a hole the size of a cherry tomato." Kurt Vonnegut. He opened one of the first Saab dealerships in America. Jupiter has the shortest day of all the planets. Can I stop now? Does it hurt your head? Do you see auras around things? No, but your expectant expression is low-key stressing me out. Liz cackled and walked away. You have no idea how amusing that party trick is, she added, over her shoulder. Don't forget to dress nice tomorrow. Mephistopheles is coming in. Okay. Nina frowned after her, then tried to remember how long Jupiter's day actually was. She couldn't help it, it was 9 hours and 55 minutes. Thank God for that. Not being able to remember something was, for Nina, torture. It was like an itch on the roof of your mouth, or when you get a bug bite between your toes. You have to go after it, even though it's almost too much sensation to deal with. Liz thought all the clubs and activities Nina did were a way to be social, but she was totally wrong. Left undistracted, her brain tended to fly off the rails and drive her insane with endless meandering rivers of thought, or constant badgering questions she needed to look up answers to. The trivia, the reading, the book clubs, they were simply weapons of self-defense. 2. In which we learn a few things that irritate Nina. Nina walked home in the golden light of her evening neighborhood, the magical hour beloved of lighting directors and single young people dreaming their plans for the night. Around her, people walked their dogs after work, talking on their phones, oblivious to the slanting sun glinting on windows and door knockers, the colors of the pastel sky as gauzy as any red carpet lineup. Nina often reflected that LA was not a pretty city, architecturally speaking, but the sky made it beautiful several times a day. As with all things Hollywood, the lighting guy is God. For example, at this time of day the sun made a great deal of her dark red hair. Had Nina known how pretty it looked, she would have taken a photo of herself, but sadly, she was thinking about pickles sliced, whole, or relish, discuss and missed the opportunity. In general, she wasn't the kind of woman who turned casual heads, her looks were an acquired taste, and her resting expression suggested you weren't going to be given much chance to acquire it. She was small and slender and gave the overall impression of a baby deer, until she spoke and you realized you'd been looking at a fox all along. As her good friend Leah once said, she wasn't mean, she was painfully accurate. Nina rented the guest house of one of the larger houses on Windsor Boulevard. It was a charming little place, completely separate from the main house, with its own entrance. Absolutely perfect for Nina. The owners were friends of Nina's mother, and when Nina finished college, this couple had miraculously just finished renovating their guest house. They generously offered to rent it to Nina, who couldn't have been happier to accept. Her cat, Phil, was sitting on the gate, waiting for her. Phil was a tabby of the brown and cream variety, with a black tip to his tail and white feet. He jumped down as the gate opened and preceded her up the stairs, the tip of his tail forming a jaunty accent like a marker flag on a toddler's bicycle. Nina noticed he'd left a large but very dead worm on the doormat. He stood next to it casually, like, "Oh yeah, I'd almost forgotten, I brought you a worm. Nothing special, just a deadly worm I captured with my own paws and brought back for you. Thought you might fancy a little smackerel of something after work, you know." He was apparently channeling Pooh Bear. Nina bent down and stroked his head. "Thanks, Phil. This is an incredible worm." Phil rubbed against her legs, totally stoked with himself. Other cats might stay in all day, lounging around and licking their butts, but he was out and about getting the job done. "I'm going to save it for later, though, if that's all right with you." Phil shrugged. Nina opened the door and walked in, kicking off her shoes and surreptitiously placing the worm on the kitchen counter to be thrown away when the cat wasn't looking. She looked up at the giant clock on the wall, still an hour before the trivia thing started. She turned on the kettle, time to chill and tidy. She loved her apartment, even if calling it an apartment was a bit of a stretch. It was basically one big room, with a tiny kitchenette and bathroom, but what it had in abundance was light and bookshelves, and really, what else does anyone need? Big double windows on the south and west walls filled the place with sun and color, and the shelves went from floor to ceiling. One single bed nestled against the wall, which left room for an oversized armchair near the window, where Nina could and did sit for hours and read her butt off. The Persian rug was all reds and oranges and tigers and birds, a souvenir of some trip of her mom's, and had shown up a week or two after Nina had moved her stuff: a bed, a chair, 6 boxes of books, a kitten, a coffee maker, and a large bulletin board. The note attached had read, "Hey, had this in storage for years, thought you might like it. Let me know if you want the rest of the stuff." Rest of the stuff. Nina had called her mom immediately. "Hey, Mom. Where are you?" This was her standard greeting. "I'm in London right now, darling. Where are you?" Her mom was Australian, but her accent had softened over the years to the occasional hint. She said soccer instead of soccer, or lollies instead of candy, but it wasn't like she walked around in a hat with corks dangling from it. Nina had smiled to hear her mother's voice, the part of her she was most familiar with. "I'm in Dubai, Mom, at the top of the Burj Khalifa." "Really?" Her mom sounded excited. "How's the view?" Nina had sighed. "No, I'm in Los Angeles, right where you left me." "Oh." Her mom was clearly disappointed Nina hadn't inherited her wanderlust. She didn't say it in so many words, but she didn't have to. "What's with this carpet?" Nina had asked, poking the rolled-up rug with her foot. Nina could hear her mom sipping tea. She had probably been doing 3 or 4 things at the same time as taking Nina's call. One thing at a time? Where's the fun in that? "Well, I lived in LA when I was pregnant with you, remember?" Of course. Nina knew her own origin story by heart, as everybody does. Her mother hadn't been a slut, exactly, but she hadn't been interested in romantic relationships. Nina had asked her many years earlier why she'd chosen not to have an abortion, and Candice had laughed in her usual way. "Because I thought it would be an adventure, and it was. Adventure. The rug is gorgeous. What's the rest of the stuff like?" "Well, I think there's all kinds of things. Go look if you want." She'd told her where the storage unit was, and now, as Nina looked around her happy little place, she was looking at furniture she might have peed on as a baby. A small Keelim sofa, an ottoman from Rajasthan, which Phil thought was his, and as much of her mom's art collection as she could drag out of storage. The one wall that wasn't covered with books was covered with photographs, images by Ruth Orkin, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Inga Morath, and a few snapshots Nina liked that she'd taken herself, posters and magazine covers featuring the TV shows and celebrities of her childhood. Her visualization corner, with its bulletin board and calendar, "Don't mock, you only wish you were as organized as Nina," photos of Nina's mom and Phil as a kitten. A single morm bed, by the way, the plural of morm is just morm, like dear. Morm sounds wrong, although it also sounds like a delicious marshmallow candy. Ooh, are those chocolate morms, from IKEA with the optional storage drawers, please note, was tucked against a wall. Stooping to pick up the mail, Nina fed Phil and poured herself a glass of wine. Then she wandered over to her visualization corner and stood there, frowning at her bulletin board, with its inspirational images, quotes, and life hacks she never actually put into practice. She enjoyed being organized but always felt there was so much room for more. She loved having color-coordinated folders and lists and spent half an hour each morning reviewing her planner, setting her goals and intentions for the day, and generally pondering. This was time she had, of course, set aside for that purpose in her planner. She only wished there was more to actually, plan. She sometimes made lists of things she'd already done solely so she could cross them off, which she couldn't help feeling was pretty pathetic but strangely satisfying. She'd graduated from UCLA with a useless but interesting degree, art history, thanks for asking, and took the job at nights while she worked out what she wanted to do now she was grown up. She spent the next few years actually growing up, having short-lived love affairs and one slightly longer love affair and then some more short ones, and getting in shape and being vegan and paleo and then giving up and eating everything again. She took up yoga, then spinning, then a combination yoga and spin class she inwardly referred to as spoga, then decoupage and knitting and a series of those evenings where you drink wine and paint, but she had a niggling suspicion she was underperforming in some way. Surely her purpose in life wasn't simply to read as many books as possible. Many of her friends were in long-term romantic relationships, but Nina was single. She liked sex, she enjoyed people with different points of view, she dated. But dating in LA was an internet-enabled contact sport, and after a dozen evenings that established new lows for interpersonal behavior, she decided to take a break from dating. It had been a lot easier than the time she tried to give up caffeine. Nina worried she liked being alone too much. It was the only time she ever fully relaxed. People were exhausting. They made her anxious. Leaving her apartment every morning was the turning over of a giant hourglass, the mental energy she'd stored up overnight eroding grain by grain. She refueled during the day by grabbing moments of solitude and sometimes felt her life was a long-distance swim between islands of silence. She enjoyed people she really did, she just needed to take them in homeopathic doses. A little of the poison was a cure. In solitude she set goals and made them, challenged herself and accepted the challenge, took up hobbies and dropped them, and if she periodically cleaned off her bulletin board and stuck up new goals and plans and dates and budgets and bought a new planner in the middle of the year and started over, so what? Nina leaned forward and crossed off that day's date on the calendar, even though it wasn't fully done yet. See? 100% ahead of the game. Nina's trivia team consisted of her and her 3 closest friends and was called Book M, Dano, because why not? They were unassailable on books, Nina, history and geography, her friend Leah, contemporary popular culture, Carter, an ex-boyfriend of Leah's who'd been too smart and funny to completely let go of, and current events and politics, her other friend, Lauren. All of them were equally good, in true millennial fashion, at classic popular culture, 1950 to 1995, Lucy Ricardo to Chandler Bing, and identifying international snacks. Despite the fact that Nina was a football fan, their Achilles heel was still sports. In an effort to broaden her athletic knowledge, Nina had started reading Sports Illustrated, but so far all it had done was give her dirty dreams about a Norwegian snowboarder whose name she couldn't even pronounce. Having been thrown out of their last regular bar for never letting anyone else win, Book M, Dano was now cautiously testing a new venue. Sugar Lips was in Silver Lake, had been open 2 months, and served a vast selection of sodas, international and domestic, alongside the traditional panoply of craft beers. It was also making a name for itself by serving bowls of dry breakfast cereal as bar snacks, which presumably explained the name. "How is it?" Lauren was watching Carter try a prickly pear soda. Lauren had dark hair, dark eyes, and a dark soul that delighted in humor other people might consider sardonic. She reminded Nina of a really good loaf of sourdough bread, crusty on the outside, with a soft and rewarding interior. Carter shrugged. "You know, I've never had anything else prickly pear flavored, so I realized halfway through I didn't have a frame of reference. But it tastes like watermelon bubble gum." He took another sip. "It's kind of awesome, but I should probably be stoned to truly enjoy it." He didn't look like the kind of guy that got stoned, he looked like the kind of guy who helped old ladies across the street and regularly took communion, but, as we all know, appearances are very deceptive. He had the symbol of the Rebel Alliance tattooed on his arm, and the Force was strong in his family. "No." Nina shook her head. "Keep your head in the game. You know the rules." "It might make me quicker." Lauren snorted into her beer. "Yeah, because that's something people say all the time. We need to move with maximum speed and efficiency, break out the pot." The trivia contest began, and Book M kicked butt for an hour or so. Then a late entry arrived to harsh their mellow. "Oh crap," muttered Carter. "Look who it isn't." Nina craned around. Who isn't it? Damn it, said Leah. It's your acquizzard, Harry. Nina kept a straight face, but inwardly she was vexed. Quizzard was really the only challenge they had in the East Los Angeles bar trivia world, which, admittedly, is an extremely small world, but Nina was competitive. They watched as Quizzard, which was 3 guys and a girl, like the Bizarro World version of them, sat down at a table across from them. The team leader was clearly the tall guy who narrowed his eyes at Nina, and then raised his hand in mock salute. Nina held his gaze for a second, then yawned hugely. Nice, said Lauren. Subtle. He annoys me. Is it his cuteness or the fact that he knows so much more about sports than you? He's not cute. And he knows more about sports because he's a dumb jock. Have you noticed he never answers a question about anything other than sports? That's not true, he answered a question about supermodels a few weeks ago. Pa, swimsuit issue, said Nina. Lauren and Leah looked at each other over her head. I think it's the cuteness, personally, said Leah. I think you two are destined to fall in love and run off together on a trivia honeymoon. Which would take place where? The Culver City studio where Jeopardy! Is filmed. Washington, D.C., so you can geek out at the Library of Congress. Hawaii? They all looked at Carter. What has Hawaii got to do with trivia? Asked Lauren. Carter shrugged. I don't know. I was focusing on the honeymoon part. Nina sighed. He's objectively attractive but subjectively repulsive, on account of his overwhelming self-confidence. Carter nodded. That's right, because women hate a confident man. That's why Luke is so much more attractive than Han. Nina said, sarcasm gives you wrinkles. She looked at the Quizzard team leader, surreptitiously. He had dark hair that seemed uncombed, which was good, and a bony, lean face that only just missed being traditionally handsome because he'd clearly broken his nose at some point. Besides, he looks like he fights, and I'm a pacifist. Neither of these things was strictly true, and Carter rolled his eyes. The quizmaster tapped on his microphone. Okay, we have a new team joining the fray. You're a Quizzard, Harry. The current leader, Bookish, Dano, is ahead by 10 points, but we've still got 3 rounds to play, and, per the rules, late teams don't get any extra credit, so, good luck, everyone. Nina checked that everyone had their pencils handy, and spare paper for notes. No one else needed paper and pencil, of course she was the one who filled in the answers, but she liked everyone to be prepared. What if she suddenly had a seizure and broke her pencil? Her brain smash cut to a slow-mo of her falling to the ground, the pencil snapping under her, pieces of wood and graphite flicking across the floor. She really needed to get laid. This kind of daydreaming couldn't possibly be a good sign. She looked over at the Quizzard guy who, she had to admit, was totally sexy and probably as dumb as a stump. No, brain, no, she told herself, to which her brain responded that she was not in any way responsible for the issue at hand, and suggested Nina address her complaints to a lower authority. Are you paying attention, Nina? Barked Leah. They're handing out the quiz sheets. Yes, yes. She took the sheet from the quizmaster, who leaned over and said, $10 Quizzard beats the crap out of you. Nina frowned at him. Howard, get a grip. We're already 1 round ahead. It'll be hard for them to catch up. Leah leaned over and poked the guy in the chest. Hey, just because I wouldn't go out with you, there is no need to drag trivia into it. This is an honorable sport, played by honorable people. In honorable bars, chimed in Carter. At honorable times, concluded Lauren. They all knew Howard because he traveled from bar to bar, running quiz nights. He called himself the king of questions but was referred to by everyone else as Quiz Dick. He loved to wield his power, which was solely based on his having all the answers, and the team suspected he was responsible for getting them banned from the last place. "You guys are drunk. They're going to wipe the floor with you." "I am not drunk," said Nina. "I am stone cold sober, and I am going to take your bet and then I am going to take your money." Howard sneered, which was even less attractive than you might think, and sauntered away. Over at the quizzed table, the girl member of the team, Lisa, was making fun of Tom, the tall guy who Nina thought was dumb as a stump. "You like that girl, don't you?" She inclined her head half an inch in Nina's direction. Tom shook his head. "Not at all. She's full of herself. And she's really short." He could have gone on to say she had skin like a peach and hair the color of an Irish setter and a mouth that was higher at one corner than the other and ankles that tapered just so, but he thought it might undermine his position. Jack, another quizzed, made a face. "You're jealous because she knows more than you do." "She doesn't." "Yes, she does. She seems to know everything." "No one knows everything." "I heard she works at a bookstore," said Paul, the final member of the quizzed team. "Isn't that cheating?" said Jack. Tom looked at him. "I don't think having a job is cheating, Jack. Lots of people have jobs." "Not me," said Jack proudly. There was a pause while he considered whether or not that was something to boast about, but ultimately decided he was cool with it. "I'm an artist." "You're a vandal," said Lisa. "You write your name on the sides of buildings." "I'm exercising my right to political protest," said Jack. "You'll be exercising your right to do community service," replied Paul. He was a lawyer, he couldn't help it. Lisa, who had known Tom since high school, watched his face. He definitely liked that girl, the Bookish team leader. She looked over at the girl, who really was pretty in an unusual and interesting way, and wondered if they knew anyone in common. It was time Tom started dating again. Enough time had passed since the last disaster. She made a note to ask Jack which bookstore it was. Howard tapped the microphone again. "Teams, let the battle commence. Pencils at the ready, the time starts, now." 3. In which Nina is surprised, not necessarily in a good way. Mornings were a bit of a challenge at Nina's house. In Nina's imaginary life, which was the one she wished she were leading, rather than the one she'd been handed at birth, she would get up, wash her face with a variety of responsibly sourced products, shower in one of those showers with multiple heads, though she often wondered what happened when you bent down for the shampoo. Did you get a blast of water full in the face? That seemed rude, and then dress herself in comfortable but stylish clothes made of natural fibers picked by well-paid workers. Are you following all this? Then she would breakfast on fresh fruit and whole grains and yogurt made from milk freely donated by goats who had more than they needed for themselves. She would be grateful and mindful and not in any way blemished. It was actually more like this. Nina would get up and her head would hurt because she drank wine that was at least 30% sulfites or whatever it is that causes headaches. Her mouth would feel like the inside of one of those single socks you see on the street sometimes, and her hair would be depressed. She would stand slightly crouched by the coffee maker and shiver until the coffee was done. Sometimes her glassy eyes would rest on her visualization corner and she would resent the steady way the planet whirled around the sun without consulting her at all. Day after day, night after night, rinse and repeat. Basically, until the first slug of caffeine hit her system, she was essentially in suspended animation, and she'd been known to drool. Once she was caffeinated and showered, she was a whole new person. That person would take a second cup of coffee to the big armchair and pull out her planner and pencil box. She would decide what to eat, and how she was going to exercise. She would make a shopping list. She would feel like her life was controlled and organized and heading in the right direction. It was the most satisfying part of her day. Today she had a book club meeting, after which her plan was to come home and read until bedtime. She laid out some extra fluffy pajama pants and socks in preparation. She made a note to get popcorn. She made a note to get mini marshmallows to go in her cocoa. And then she made a note to get cocoa. And milk. And then she looked on eBay for an interesting vintage cocoa mug, but then she noticed the time and closed everything and rushed off to work. On the way to work, Nina felt pretty chirpy, and put in her earbuds and pretended she was in a movie, smiling at all the people who passed her and saying hello to the dogs. She had this fantasy a lot, that her life was like the Truman Show, that audiences all over the world were enjoying her playlist and hairstyle as much as she was. She would angle her face to the sun to help the lighting guy, or look over her shoulder to give the camera back there's something to do. In public, Nina was a quiet, reserved person. In private, she was an all-singing, all-dancing cavalcade of light and motion. Unless she was a quivering ball of anxiety, because that was also a frequently selected option. She was very good at hiding it, but anxiety was like her anti-superpower, the one that came out unbidden in a crisis. The Hulk gets angry, Nina got anxious. Nina had a lot of sympathy for Bruce Banner, particularly the version played by Mark Ruffalo, and at least she had Xanax. He only had Thor. Nina reached Larchmont Boulevard, with its artisanal hat and cheese shops, two different shops, that would be a weird combination, especially in warm weather, and turned into her favorite cafe to grab a gluten-free low-fat bran muffin. Just kidding, it was a chocolate croissant. "Hi, Nina," said Vanessa, a friend of hers who worked there. "What's new?" "Surprisingly little," Nina said. "I'll have a chocolate croissant." The breakfast of champions. French champions. Champignons? Nina said, "I think that means mushrooms." She sounded more confident than she was. Vanessa shrugged. "Look, I've only had 2 cups of coffee. I'm barely alive." Nina took her croissant without a bag and ate it as she crossed the street. Multitasking and eco-sensitive all at once. Not even 9 a.m. and already ahead for the day. Liz looked up as she walked in. "Ooh, did you get one of those for me?" Nina turned and went back across the street. A minute later she had returned. "Yes, I did, funnily enough." "That's so nice of you. How was the trivia thing?" "We lost." Liz stared at her. "What? You never lose." Nina kicked a bookcase. "Well, we did last night. It came down to a tiebreaker and the topic was horse racing and we lost. Did you know all racehorses have their birthday on January 1st? No? Neither did I." Liz frowned at her. "Don't kick the bookcase. I'm sorry your fund of general knowledge stops short of the sport of kings, but damage the fittings and it's coming out of your wages." She turned to walk away, clicking her tongue, but then suddenly turned back. "And don't forget to make a pile of books in case of Mephistopheles." She walked on, then stopped again. "Oh, and I forgot, in the shock of your losing, you missed a call." Nina swept the buttery crumbs from her sweater, glad none of them had lingered long enough to leave a stain, which always made her think of The Simpsons. Remember, if the paper turns clear, it's your window to weight gain, and frowned at her. "A call?" "A customer." Liz shrugged and bit into her croissant, adding crumbs to her own shirt. "I don't know. A man. He asked for Nina Hill, which is you, and when I asked if he wanted to leave a message, he said he would call back." The phone rang. "Maybe that's him." But it wasn't, it was someone else entirely, and Nina had already forgotten about the call when the man who'd placed it walked into the bookstore a couple of hours later. He stood out immediately, because he was wearing a suit of a cut and kind not often seen on Larchmont Boulevard. A serious suit. A white shirt with starch. A pocket square. Most of the people in Larchmont worked in one creative field or another, and tended to wear hooded sweatshirts and high tops. The more successful they were, the shabbier they looked. This guy looked like an alien. Nina Hill. Liz pointed at her, although Nina had already looked up when she'd heard her name, like a cat hearing a distant can opener. She'd been happily shelving new non-fiction, and at that very moment was holding a book about earthworms and thinking fondly of Phil and his generous nature. She looked over at the guy and decided he was probably bad news. He approached her, gliding as if he were on casters, and said, "Miss Hill." Nina Lee Hill. It was too late to run for it, and as far as she knew, there were no outstanding warrants for her arrest, so she nodded. He smiled. "Is there somewhere we might speak privately?" "Definitely bad news." The office at nights was very small and mostly filled with cartons of books, oversized poster board advertisements for books, and piles of books that threatened to tip and spill at any moment. There was one chair, which was supposed to be adjustable but wasn't, and the man gestured in a go-ahead kind of way, so Nina Saturday. That turned out to be super weird, because her face was basically on the same level as his crotch. Broken chair, so she stood back up. He didn't sit down, either, as there really wasn't room to get past her, and so they stood there, about 4 inches too close to each other to be comfortable. Nina wanted to take a big step back, and possibly assume a defensive stance, but the moment had passed, and if she did it now, it would seem rude. Oh my God, she thought, it's hard to be human sometimes, with the pressure to be civilized lying only very thinly over the brain of a nervous little mammal. Maybe other people's layer of civilization was thicker than hers. Hers was like a peel-off face mask after it had been peeled. Through the edge of the door she could see Liz hovering, in case she needed help. Feeling better, she decided to take the plunge and smile. "How can I help you, Mr. Sarkisian?" "I'm a lawyer for the estate of William Reynolds." "Okay." Nina waited. She'd never heard of the guy. Was she supposed to know the name? "I'm afraid I have some bad news." The lawyer paused. Nina kept waiting. If it were really bad news, the police would have shown up, right? "I'm sorry to tell you that your father has died." After a brief pause during which Nina checked for double meanings or maybe a language difficulty, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. I don't have a father." That sounded wrong. "I mean, of course I have a father, but I've never known him. We're not connected in any way, I mean. I don't know who he is." "He is, or rather was, William Reynolds." "I don't think so." The lawyer nodded. "He was. The estate has a letter from your mother, Candace Hill, confirming his paternity and absolving him of all parental liability and responsibility under the proviso he never attempt to contact you." Nina sat down on the chair after all. "I don't." Mr. Sarkisian was balding on top but with hair around the sides and back, like someone wearing a brown woolly hat with everything but the brim removed. He spoke quickly and firmly, and Nina wondered if he'd been practicing on the way over. He couldn't possibly have to break this kind of news all the time, surely. "Mr. Reynolds clearly abided by your mother's wishes during his lifetime, but you were nonetheless included in his list of beneficiaries." He paused, but Nina looked at him without replying, largely because she had absolutely no response to that. "I'm here to invite you to attend the reading of the will, which is actually in a few weeks." He looked apologetic. "It's taken me rather longer than I hoped to find you, as you could have been anywhere." He shot back a French cuff and looked at his watch. "Imagine my surprise when you turned out to be half a mile away in Los Angeles." "Why?" He smiled, relieved to finally have some good news to share. "Because this is where the rest of your family lives, of course." Nina shook her head like Phil did when she put drops in his ears. "My family." The lawyer patted her on the arm, and she was too weirded out to even bridle. "I'm sorry, I had no idea your paternity would be news to you." A momentary expression of judgment crossed his face, and Nina spoke. "My mother clearly didn't think Mr. Reynolds would have been a good father." Another expression crossed Sarkashan's face, though this one was harder to read. Well, she may have been right. It was a long time ago. Here's my card, my office address is on it, and we'll be in touch with details of the wool reading. He paused. In the meantime, I'm afraid you may be hearing from your brothers and sisters. I had to let them know about you, because they wanted to know why the wool reading had to wait. Nina stared at him. My what now? Your brothers and sisters. I have brothers and sisters. He coughed. I'm afraid your father was married 3 times. Just not to my mother. Right. He nodded. But to other women. You actually have 3 sisters and a brother, 2 nephews and 2 nieces, and 2 great-nieces and a great-nephew. Plus 2 stepmothers still living, though you don't need those, I imagine. He looked at his watch. I've asked one of your nephews, Peter Reynolds, to get in touch and explain the whole family to you, because it's complicated and he's the only one everyone is always talking to. Nina stared at him. I'm sorry, but can I pretend you never told me? I don't really want any more people in my life. I've done fine without them for nearly 30 years. She felt her breathing start to get shallow and ruled herself to slow it down so she wouldn't hyperventilate and topple to the ground. The lawyer had clearly not considered this option and looked puzzled. Mr. Reynolds was an extremely wealthy man, and the fact that you're a beneficiary means he presumably left you something of value. Nina tried to focus. Well, not to look a gift horse in the mouth, but unless it's a buttload of money, I really don't care. I'm not sure I even care if it's a buttload of money. Of course you do, said the lawyer. Everyone cares about money. Again with the watch. I have to go. Peter will contact you shortly. None of them were very thrilled to hear about you, I'm afraid. Except Peter. He's supportive of illegitimate children. Sarkashan turned to leave. He's an anthropologist. 4. In which Nina observes other people and talks to her mother. Well, obviously after that kind of news, Nina walked out of the store and wandered the streets sightless with shock, rending the air with lamentation. Actually, she went back to work, because they had preschooler reading hour that afternoon and she was nominally in charge. Life can throw you major curveballs, but it's rare you can do much more than duck. Liz was not a lover of children, describing them as sticky little bookchuckers, so the store's schedule of kid activities was Nina's to run. She took it seriously, and had developed quite a program. Baby and parent reading time. In this activity, which happened 3 mornings a week, newborns and lap babies lay like slugs while the parents listened to an impoverished young actor read to them. To be fair, most of these parents were basically asleep with their eyes open, and the babies often rolled off their laps onto the reading is cool rug. The actor was usually hoping at least one of the parents was an agent or something, and ever since one reader had been plucked from obscurity to star in a pilot that actually went somewhere, there had been a waiting list to read. Nina did her best to keep things fair, but she had been known to succumb to bribery. Cease candies were her weakness, in case you're wondering. Preschooler reading hour. 3 to 5-year-olds and nannies, throwing books around, the kids, not the nannies, with the nannies doing the reading, and extremely popular. Firstly because the nannies could relax and chat a bit, and secondly because parents could say, oh, the nanny takes aubergine and salamander to reading hour every day, and feel better about preferring to be at work with people who knew how to use a fork. Daily, at 3:30. Elementary book club. This was Nina's pet project. Larchmont was a neighborhood filled with kids, and the girls in particular were very big on books. The boys were, too, they just preferred not to talk about them, whereas the girls were all about the chatter. These little girls were strong and confident, mostly, because of when and where they were growing up, and because puberty hadn't smacked them across the head yet. They unapologetically and voraciously read books about fairies and witches and female heroines who didn't need rescuing, and would open a book to check it out and then still be standing there reading an hour later when their parents reappeared. It was wonderful to watch a kid get tugged ineluctably into a different world. Nina had developed a special fondness for these kids, because she knew the world would soon begin telling them other things were more important than the contents of their heads. So she started the elementary book club, and once a month after the store had closed at 7, she would sit there with a group of 8 to 12-year-old girls and talk about books for an hour. It was the club she wished she'd had when she was their age, and if she occasionally sat there making friendship bracelets and talking about a mango-shaped space with even more enthusiasm than the 10-year-olds, what's your point? Young Adult Book Club, this one was all Liz. She loved a darkling teen. There had been some discussion of starting a regular, adult book club, but Nina didn't have time, because she already belonged to a weekly adult book clubs of which more later, and that commitment, along with the elementary book club, her exercise regime, if you can call sporadic exercise classes and fervent promises to do better a regime, and of course the trivia team, meant she had no free time. Liz refused to do it, and the part-time girl who worked there, Polly, hated reading. Why does she work in a bookstore, you ask? It's a long story. Anyway. Despite not having a child herself, Nina enjoyed watching other people handle the unsuspected responsibilities of parenthood. The baby wasn't the biggest problem at all, it turned out, it was the other parents. There was a definite learning curve over the first few years, and Nina had a ringside seat, because so many of Larchman's parents were parishioners at the Church of the Dust-Jacketed Hardback and brought their kids in all the time. She'd watched dozens of little kids graduate from Goodnight Moon to Bedtime for Francis to Junie B. Jones to whatever YA series was trending, and with them went their parents, learning to navigate the intricate social networks of neighborhood and school. Take when two moms met in the store at reading time. Standard school mom rules of engagement applied. If your children were friends and you met while both of you were standing, you hugged, of course. If one of you was sitting on the floor already and your kids were good friends, with an actual, out-of-school playdate under their tiny rainbow belts, then the one sitting would start to stand but the other would wave her back down and bend from the waist to half hug. If your kids were really good friends, with multiple playdates and maybe a sleepover in their shared past, then the one sitting would scooch over to make room for the other, and they would hug once both were down. Nina studied these things, because they didn't come naturally to her. And working in a store where people tended to aimlessly wander around looking at books gave her ample opportunity for observation. Nina's special favorite was watching people handle introductions. It played out like this: a woman would be browsing in the store, trying to decide whether she had the balls to get something vaguely pornographic or if she'd have to stick with something worthy. Note, this is where that online bookseller really triumphs, undercover purchasing, and notices someone she knows has come in. In a split second, she has to decide whether or not to acknowledge their existence, the decision depending on how well she knows them, how well they know her, and whether or not she can get away with ignoring them, i.e., they definitely haven't seen her yet, or she's disguised as a pirate. Their eyes meet, and now she has to decide whether to say hi and keep browsing, or actually approach and greet. She decides she can't get away without actually greeting, but then realizes the other woman has someone else with her, someone who looks vaguely familiar, but she can't remember why. Nina had seen this scenario so often she'd gotten used to the flicker of panic in a woman's eyes as she walked forward while desperately wishing she weren't. It was hilarious, but only when it wasn't you. Anyway, now the friend is committed, too, whether she likes it or not, so she says hey, the original woman says hey, hug regulations apply as previously described. Then the friend says, so, whatever your name is, this is Bindy Macaroon, I think you two might already know each other. Moms of a certain age know dozens and dozens of people through various channels, so they have to perform this human equivalent of canine but sniffing all the goddamn time. Original woman, oh, hi, Bindy. Do we know each other? Here there would be a lot of head movement and facial expressions that alternated between friendly openness and self-abasement, playing it safe until the connection is clarified. If it turns out they know each other because one of them slept with the other one's boyfriend in college, then, awkward. BINDY, I think we do. You look so familiar. Similar head bobbing and approach withdraw body language. Do you have a kid in Miss Rectangle's class? Original, no. My daughter, Elephantine, pronounced the French way, of course, is in Mr. Elevator's class. Does your child do swimming at the YMCA with Professor Bubbles? Bindy, no. Art class on Saturdays at Brushlicious? Original, no. Preschool? We were at Harmony House of Love and Kindness, were you? Bindy, no. Urethra went to Mandarin Immersion Buddhist Chakra Preschool. In the Valley. And with that they would give up and shrug and would never, ever realize they knew each other because one time they bumped cars in traffic and stood on the street for 10 minutes exchanging insurance information. If you had walked into the bookstore after lunch that day, you would have seen Nina making a pile of books on the counter that might have struck you as dangerously unbalanced, and shortly before 2 in the afternoon, she suddenly knocked it to the floor. It made an incredible noise. The man who'd just walked through the door paused and narrowed his eyes at her. Is Liz here? Mr. Meffo was their landlord. Larchmont Boulevard was broadly owned by 3 or 4 people. A large family had owned properties in one section of the boulevard since the 60s, and they were generally mellow and much loved. Another landlord was an investment bank that kept out of it, for the most part. And the third was Mr. Meffo. He was a popular villain on the boulevard, but of course he was just a regular businessman trying to make a profit, which would be the actual point of business. If he'd been a sheep farmer, he would have been carrying a lamb around and wearing a bonnet, but as he was a landlord, he was carrying an iPad and a cell phone. Unfortunately, the rent had gone up precipitously, and business hadn't followed suit, so Liz had taken to hiding whenever he came around. She paid the rent, more or less, she just took generous advantage of space and time. She also called the poor man Mephistopheles, which wasn't nice. Sorry, Mr. Meffo, she just left. Nina hoped the book fall had been sufficient warning. Once Liz had been trapped with a customer when Mephistopheles walked in and had had to pay the rent on time. Mr. Meffo sighed. He wasn't a bad man, he was simply a good businessman. Can you tell her to call me, please? The rent is overdue. Nina nodded and smiled, glad she'd worn a nice, professional outfit. Liz had told her they needed to look successful, so it wouldn't cross Meffo's mind to cancel their lease. I'm sure she knows, Mr. Meffo. We've been very busy with lots of customers lately. He looked around at the empty store. Really? Oh yes, you just missed a rush. Did I? He looked at Nina, doubtfully. Well, tell Liz I've had several inquiries about the store, and 1 or 2 buyers interested, which is appealing. He sighed. Being a landlord isn't as much fun as you'd think. Nina said nothing, having never thought being a landlord would be fun. He left, and Nina waited 10 or 20 minutes until Liz peered around the office door. Is he gone? Nina nodded. You must pay the rent, she said. I can't pay the rent, replied Liz. You must pay the rent, Nina insisted. I can't pay the rent, said Liz, again. Nina assumed a Dudley Do-Right voice. I'll pay the rent, and Liz sighed, my hero, and then they went about their day. Later that day, Nina finally reached her mom. She had to get the timing right in order to catch her mother when she wasn't ignoring her phone, which was most of the time. Candice Hill had grown up in the darkest Australian wilds of the 1980s, where, reportedly, the women glowed and the men plundered, but no one had a cell phone. These days, she was remarkably cavalier about turning hers on. I don't want to make myself too easy to find, darling, she would say, as if being thousands of miles away wasn't enough. Nina had decided 7 a.m. in China was a reasonably good bet, so she stepped into the bookstore office a little before 4 in the afternoon, before the high school kids came in to moon around the graphic novels and peep at one another over the shelves. The phone rang and rang, and Nina was getting ready to leave a sarcastic voicemail when her mother picked up. Of course, modern telecommunications made it sound like she was across the street. "Good morning, lovely," Candice yelled, as she often did. "Everything okay?" "Well, mostly," replied Nina. "What can I do you for, my love?" "I have to be at work in an hour." "Spit it out." She issued an order in Mandarin, multitasking as usual. "William Reynolds is dead." There was a pause, then the sound of her mother exhaling. "She gave it a shot, though." "Sorry, who's that then?" "My father, William Reynolds." Candice could tell Nina was mad, but she was still blasé, because she'd been born that way. "Oh, that William Reynolds. Yeah. I was hoping you'd never find out about him." This was one of the things Nina actually loved about her mother. She would lie or make up crap and then, if you caught her at it, simply admit defeat and move on. She didn't seem to experience shame or regret in any form. However lovable her mother was, though, Nina was being firm with her. "Well, I did, so how about you fill me in? Why on earth didn't you tell me I had a father? You knew I wondered. Why did you think it was a good idea to keep us apart? I have brothers and sisters." "You do? That's nice." Nina's voice went up an octave. "Mom, I have more than half a dozen relatives living in the same city as I am. Just think of all the playdates and birthday parties I missed out on." Her mother laughed. "You didn't need anyone to play with, you were fine. Other people are overrated." "I generally agree, Mom, but I would have liked the option." Nina noticed her other hand was clenched tightly, and reached for a pencil. She twirled it back and forth through her fingers, a nervous habit she'd refined into a party trick. Assuming she was at the kind of party where pencil twiddling would be impressive. Her mother paused, then said defensively, "He wouldn't have been a good dad, Nina. He was a player, he was full of himself, he had a wife." "A wife is not a character trait, Mom." "And what about you, sleeping with a married man? What the hell? What about hoes before brothers, dude?" "I beg your pardon. Nina Leahill, did you just call me a hoe?" Nina laughed, suddenly, and tossed her pencil away. Her mother always made things seem lighter. It was partly her Australian accent and general let's get on with it and stop making a fuss approach to everything, and partly her personality. Candice Hill had no patience for drama, or overblown feelings, really, of any kind. Which made her superficial and frustrating if, like Nina, you wanted to have a conversation about emotional topics like discovering your entire life had been a lie, but which also made things clunk back into perspective. "No, Mom, I didn't call you a hoe, but please take a second to think about how this might feel to me." Candice clicked her tongue. "Nina, this all happened nearly 30 years ago. Your father was very handsome, we met on a photo shoot of some kind, I don't even remember, we stayed in my apartment for a long weekend, and then I found out he had a wife, who was actually pregnant at the time if I remember rightly, so I cut him off and moved on. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant and decided to keep you. He wasn't really part of any of it except for a sweaty 48 hours at the start." Nina badly wanted to cover her ears and say lo lo lo, but she was holding the phone. Candice continued, "I had enough money and time to take care of you, and I didn't want him involved, because I didn't know him at all and he'd already exhibited bad judgment by cheating on his wife, so I made him sign something promising to leave you alone and that was that. I never saw him again. I'm amazed he even remembered my name." "Well, to be fair, Mom, your name might have been slightly less memorable than the fact he had an actual child. That one's a little harder to forget. Not everyone finds it as easy as you did." "What a pain in the ass. I knew he was bad news. It would have been better if he hadn't been news at all. I hate surprises, you know that." Yeah, I know, which is something you must have inherited from him, because I love surprises. Nina rolled her eyes. We were talking about me. I have to go. Are we done here? Yeah. Any chance you're going to say, sorry, Nina, you're right, I should have prepared you for this sudden shock? Her mother made a huffy noise. None. I didn't expect him to break his word after 3 decades. If anyone owes you an apology, it's him. Well, he's dead. Serves him right. Candace sighed. I'm sorry he was a loser, Nina. But you're a big girl now, you can handle this. And with that she hung up. Nina sighed and wondered if she would ever be a mom herself and, if she were, if she would be any better at it than her own mother was. As a child, Nina had been sad her mother wasn't there, because everyone else seemed to think it was sad. Then, as a teenager, she'd been angry with her absent mother, and blamed her for her own anxiety and shyness. Now, as an adult, she'd come to the conclusion that her mother being away all the time had probably been a blessing. Her nanny, Louise, had been a wonderful mother, and her mother had been a wonderful photographer. Biology is not destiny, and love is not proportionate to shared DNA. Of course, she reflected, as she put down the phone and returned to the store, she could be totally wrong about this. She was wrong about so many things. 5. In which Nina attends a book club meeting and gets an email. Nina went home after work and Googled the crap out of William Reynolds. It was a common name, but she decided he couldn't have been a professional tennis player from the early 20th century, or an English lord of the 17th century, and was more likely to have been this lawyer guy who lived in Los Angeles until he died a week or two earlier. She guessed she'd missed the funeral. Seeing as she'd missed everything else, this wasn't a stinger. All the obit said was he'd been 78 and was survived by a widow and young daughter. She knew the last part wasn't accurate, although she'd already forgotten how many children there actually were. She found a few pictures of him online, usually attending a charity function of some kind, always in a tux. He didn't remind her of herself, but, to be fair, she was a slender 29-year-old woman with dark red hair and freckles, and he had been a rounded old man with white hair and wrinkles, so it wasn't exactly apples to apples. More like grapes to raisins. Nina wondered if she and her siblings would like each other, and if they'd have things in common, like a fondness for The Simpsons and sandwiches. Maybe they'd become good friends, or maybe they'd start a family feud like a TV reality show. She drifted off for a moment, creating title sequences for Reynolds vs. Hill, Sibling Wars, which for some reason had mid-80s synthesizer theme music and the kind of credits that whoosh in from the side. Would she appear as herself, or would she be played by someone more telegenic? She didn't photograph well, which was a bigger problem for her generation than it had been for any generation prior. Her friend Leah, who was all about building a personal brand, had told her to keep still more often. Your face is too mobile, she'd explained. I'm talking and laughing and being an active listener, Nina had replied. Well, quit it, because you look like you've been poked with a pin in every picture. She'd pulled some faces to illustrate her point. I do not look like that, protested Nina. You do. I have photographic evidence. You might only look like that for a few seconds at a time, but that's when the shutter clicked, so to speak, so that's what you look like online. Well, great, I can use it as a first line of defense. If a guy doesn't look beyond my pained expression to see the real, pain-free me, then he's not good enough to date me. Leah had shrugged. Or you'll filter out the regular guys and be left with those that like seeing women in pain, and then who's going to be sorry? Remembering this conversation now, Nina decided William Reynolds must have had similar advice, because if he'd ever smiled or laughed or actively listened in his life, the photographer never caught it. It had taken Nina quite some time to investigate the state of Los Angeles book clubs, and after months of study, she'd decided to form one club that discussed a different genre each week, rather than 4 different clubs that each met once a month. First Wednesday of each month was Book Bitches, contemporary fiction. Second Wednesday was Sneaky Spinsters, Golden Age mysteries. Third Wednesday was District 0, young adult fiction. Fourth Wednesday was the Electric Sheep Grazing Club, science fiction. If there was a fifth Wednesday in the month, she would wing it, because she liked to live dangerously. Book nerds are daredevils, as you know. Nina would have liked a classic literature club and a romance club as well, but God saw fit to deliver a limited number of hours in the day, and days in the week, and she needed to balance her books, so to speak, with other activities. Because she advertised her book club widely, membership varied, but it was basically a reliable core team of women who lived for books and were eclectically nerdy enough to want to discuss a different genre every week. She'd met her trivia teammates Leah and Lauren through her book club, and Vanessa, her friend from the cafe on Larchmont, had joined. The other reliable team member, Daisy, worked at a big chain bookstore, and often brought leftovers from their in-house cafe, which was a plus. The five of them were completely committed and came every week, taking turns to host and trying to set new standards for snacks. Occasionally, a new member or visitor would show up, and then they would actually have to talk about the book and be completely focused. That evening's club was Book Bitches, which was contemporary fiction, and the gang was discussing a worthy tome shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. The ladies had, however, wandered from the topic. Really? An actual photo shoot? Nina was skeptical. Yeah, really. Vanessa was flipping through her phone. Not just one, but 5. From several different angles, different lighting, moody black and white, sun flare filter, the whole 9 yards. Yards? I hope you mean inches, because a 9-yard penis would be. Nina trailed off. Lauren frowned. How many inches in a yard, again? Everyone looked at Nina. They were familiar with her memory. 36. A yard is 3 feet. She paused. She wanted to stop, but she couldn't. It's an imperial unit of measure based originally on a physical metal bar in England, which itself was based on the size of a quarter of a cow's hide. She took a breath, but Lauren, who could see when a rabbit hole was about to be explored, held up her hand. That's enough. If you keep going, we'll forget the mental image of a 27-foot penis, which would indeed be worth looking at. Leah snorted. Although presumably harder to fit all in one frame. Nina giggled and sipped her wine, trying to forget the rest of the facts she knew about units of measurement. Did you know a moment is actually a medieval term for a minute and a half, for example? She loved being at book club, because although they did talk about books and stories and writers and readers, they also chatted about other interesting things. Dick pics, for example, or the dating life of single women in Los Angeles. The two are sadly related. Here's the thing, said Daisy, who had brought 24 cake pops and may have been high as a kite on sugar. Someone needs to take men aside and whisper in their ear, dudes, your penis is not the most photogenic thing about you. Let's be honest, the out-of-context penis is not an attractive item. It's a naked mole rat wearing a beanie. Yeah. If I walked into my kitchen at night and flicked on the light and saw a penis lying on the ground, I would definitely scream and hit it with a broom. At the very least, I would climb on a chair until it rolled away. Vanessa had clearly given this topic some thought. Nina objected. But isn't that true of any body part? If you flicked on the light and a leg was lying there, you'd also be alarmed. Yes, agreed Vanessa, but at least you'd recognize it as a leg. If there was a disembodied penis, you wouldn't necessarily place it at once. Vanessa turned up her hands in exasperation. I'm not sure what it is, but its single eye is staring at me, and it's too big to squash with a rolled-up newspaper. Oh, wait, hang on, it's starting to look familiar. Nina was still not buying it. Wouldn't you be more concerned there was someone walking around missing a penis? Nope, replied Vanessa. I don't think I'd get that far. I think I'd get stuck on the penis, if you'll excuse the phrase. Leah was more practical. Why don't men ever send me a picture of them holding a puppy? I'd be so much more interested in that. Or even their smile, or their forearms, or a witty text that doesn't ask me if I'm wet. Which isn't a good question to ask either. Nina had tackled this one a few times. Because it offers up too many opportunities for sarcasm. Am I wet? Because you sent me a badly composed picture of your mediocre man meat? No, I'm not wet. I'm not even mildly moist around the edges. I'm a veritable Sahara of repulsion. She turned to Daisy. Do lesbians do this? Send dick pics? Daisy raised her eyebrows. Daisy's whole aesthetic was 50s retro pin-up, and her eyebrows were perfect for raising. Only if we're breaking up with someone and want to make sure they block our number forever. So, anyway, what did you say to the photo shoot dick guy? Nina turned to Vanessa, who shrugged. I had already said yes to a date, so I felt bad cancelling after he'd shown me the goods. She grimaced. I know I said yes to a movie, but now I know you have that monstrosity nestling in your pants, I'm no longer interested. Too hurtful. Why were you being considerate of his feelings when he had just visually insulted you? Because I'm not a horrible human being. Vanessa was occasionally too nice, although she was working on it. But I do wonder if penises look completely different from the male point of view. Is there, like, an aura or something around it, or a tiny halo? Do they think, wow, that's a handsome penis, simply the sight of it makes me horny? Let me send a photo of it to this girl and it will make her horny, too. The women collectively sighed. They're simple creatures, men, said Lauren. If they like something, they think everyone else will, too. So you're going out with him? Nina was sticking to the original topic. Vanessa nodded. Yeah, we're going to the Alien screening at the Uplight in a couple of weeks. I left plenty of time in the hopes he meets someone else in the interim. I'll be at that screening, said Nina. Shall I come over and tell him I've heard his penis looks really good in black and white? Please don't. Vanessa paused. Although if he takes it out during the film, I promise to text you for help. Leah snorted. That is absolutely the last movie you want to take your dick out in. Too much similarity to those things that burst out of people's stomachs. Take your dick out at the wrong moment and you could cause a stampede for the doors. Oh my god, that would be a great Halloween costume. You could dress as John Hurt from the first movie and have your own dick sticking out of a bloody hole in your t-shirt. Totally convincing. Nina reconsidered. Mind you, you'd have to keep it hard and menacing looking the whole time, which might be difficult in late October. Can we get back to the book? Daisy asked, giggling but trying to hold it together. We're nearly out of time. Who are you going to Aliens with? Vanessa asked Nina. Nina nodded at Leah and Lauren. These two losers, plus Carter. Are you seeing someone right now? Nina shook her head. Lauren coughed. She likes a guy at trivia, but she's too chicken to talk to him. Nina frowned and shook her head. He's cute, but he may not be worth talking to. He knows too much about sports. He probably doesn't even read. Lauren added, and that's apparently her deal breaker. Nina looked around. Isn't it everyone's? Lauren shook her head. Not mine. Mind you, I'm not a bookstore employee, so it's not like non-readers threaten my livelihood. It's not mine, either, and I do work at a bookstore, said Daisy, tucking her blonde curls behind her ear. I draw the line at non-animal lovers. Or girls who ostentatiously use hand sanitizer after going to a public bathroom. Soap and water should be enough. What are they going to do after sex? A full body scrub and chemical peel? I won't date someone who talks about politics within the first 2 hours of our meeting, said Leah. It used to be a good filter, but now everyone talks about politics, so maybe it's too fine a mesh. I might need to lower my window of exclusion. Rudeness to waiters, total veto, contributed Vanessa. Backward hats, or, actually, any hats. I hate hats. Leah looked firm. Men who call me by my last name. Unless they're my high school gym coach, it's not cute. People who blow their straw wrappers off in public. People who say, "Can I come with," as if it's a complete sentence. Calling soda soddy pop. Asking for water with no ice in a restaurant. Pussy whisperers. There was silence. "I'm sorry," asked Lauren. Vanessa blushed. You know, when a man gets down there, so to speak, and then says stuff like, "Hello there, gorgeous," or "you like that, don't you, baby," except they're talking to, you know, her and not you. Pause. It's like when you think a guy is interested but it turns out he's only trying to get to your hotter friend. You're jealous of your own snatch? Vanessa was now bright red. No, but if you give me your thoughts on my vagina, I'll make sure they get passed along, okay? We're the same person. All the women gazed at her for a moment, then Nina said, "You know what I hate? Men who assume women are scared of spiders. And mice. And snakes. Men who like Star Trek but not Star Wars, or the other way around. As if they're so incredibly different. Or who only like the original Star Trek. Or who use the word canon without irony when talking about comic books. Hey, can we get back to Nina's love life, and then the book we're supposed to be discussing? Daisy really did like to stay on schedule. There's nothing to discuss about my love life. I can't see myself dating someone who doesn't read books. What would we talk about? Nina was also ready to get back to the book. I think it's good to date people who spend time in the real world. Everyone turned to look at Vanessa, who was still blushing a bit from the pussy whispering part. Look, last year I dated a guy who could actually hang a picture. Really? Lauren was surprised. Yeah. He changed his own oil. Olive or automobile? Car oil. He cooked. He had a dog he'd actually trained to do stuff. Impressive stuff, like jump off the guy's back and catch a frisbee. Huh. Nina was interested. But he didn't read. Vanessa shook her head. No. He was too outdoorsy. He didn't like to sit still for very long, you know. And that worked. Vanessa nodded, suddenly looking a little sad. Yeah, it really did. He didn't care I was less outdoorsy. He went off and did his thing and I went and read books and it was fine. There was a pause, and then Leah asked the obvious question. So, what happened? Vanessa shrugged. He broke up with me and started dating a personal trainer who competed in that competition where they do the crazy obstacle courses. Silence. She could scale a rope wall in 8 seconds. Silence. I bet she had no imagination, Nina said, comfortingly. Yeah, Vanessa replied. Shall we get back to the book? So they did. Because, as Neil Gaiman once memorably said, books were safer than other people, anyway. When Nina got home from book club, she had an email from Peter Reynolds. Hey there, it began. This is a weird thing to say, but I am your nephew and until recently neither of us knew the other existed. Sorry about that. Sarkashan thought I might be able to help you understand the family you inherited, and I'd certainly be happy to try. Would you like to have coffee or something? Let me know. Your little nephew Peter, ha ha. She looked at it for a long time. She could always ignore it. She really had things pretty much together right now. She didn't need any new complications. Then again, what if there was a very sporty member of her new family who could help her edge out Quizzard? And why was that guy getting under her skin so much, the big, good-looking dumbass? She decided her friends at book club were right. She was being a little Lizzie Bennet about him. I care not one fig, she told herself firmly. I am not in any way intrigued. And besides, I have plenty of other things to think about. Dear Peter, she wrote. I must admit this whole thing has been a bit of a shock, and I have no real comprehension of what just happened. It would probably be helpful to get my head around it with someone who understands it all. Here's my number. Why don't you text me if Friday lunchtime works for you? Love, Auntie Nina, which is hilarious even to write. Then she put a smiley face so he'd know she was joking, and hit send. See? Not distracted by the guy in any way. Totally focusing on more important things. 100% not thinking about him. Or his hands. Not at all. 6. In which Nina feels less alone, but not necessarily in a good way. Peter Reynolds turned out to be a few years older than her, which made being his aunt feel even weirder. They'd agreed to meet for lunch at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Modern Art Museum in mid-Wilshire, right next to the tar pits, with their disturbing models of mammoths stuck in the tar-filled pond. Nina remembered standing by the fence around the pond as a child, agonizing over the baby mammoth. He, or she, it was hard to gender identify a mammoth at 50 feet, probably even for other mammoths, was standing at the side of the pond panicking because his parents were having a problem he couldn't understand. Nina had been a child with a rich imagination and way too much empathy, so after a few tearful visits, her nanny, Louise, had stopped bringing her. It's only a model, baby, she had explained. It's not real. I know, wailed 8-year-old Nina. But it could be real, right? Mammoths did get stuck in the tar. That's why all their bones are here, right? Louise had nodded. Well then, cried Nina. This is a model, but it's real life, too, and a real baby mammoth might have watched his parents get stuck and starve because they couldn't get out and days would go by, and they'd keep telling him to go find food, or somewhere safe, and he would say, no, Mommy, come out of the tar, and then she would say, I can't, baby, and she would have cried and he would have cried, or maybe some nasty dinosaur would have come and eaten him and his mommy wouldn't have been able to help, and it would have been awful. And then Louise, who didn't think that was the occasion to point out dinosaurs and mammoths hadn't lived at the same time, realized it really would have been awful, and then the tar pits were ruined for her, too. It was the same way with everything Nina experienced. Fictional characters were as real to her as the people she met and touched every day. Eventually, she developed a tougher skin and a more critical appreciation of literature, but she still cried at endings, happy or sad. Certain books had left an indelible impression, and Liz never let her forget the occasion she'd been explaining the plot of Flowers for Algernon and had started crying in the middle of the store. Not that Nina needed reminding. She'd arrived a little early for her appointment with Peter Reynolds, and had taken a table where she could watch the door. Sipping her coffee, she examined the people approaching the doorway. Every arrival was scrutinized carefully for familiar mannerisms, walks were studied, and of course she missed her actual nephew completely. A man approached her table, a broad grin on his face. Oh my God, you must be Nina. We totally have the same hair. He sounded as giddy as a kid opening a packet of Pokemon cards and finding their favorite. Nina goggled at him. He was very tall and handsome, and debonair would be the only word to describe the tweed jacket and black turtleneck he was wearing. It was true, though, his hair was the same color as hers, though his was definitely more stylishly cut. She nodded, and started to stand up. He waved his hands at her. Don't get up. I walked from La Brea, and if I don't sit down I'm going to fall down. I really need to get in shape. He smiled and sat, reaching across the table to shake her hand. Peter Reynolds, your fabulous gay nephew, and how bizarre is that? Nina shook his hand, grinning back. She'd always enjoyed the company of gay men, and finding out she was related to one was honestly a bit of a bonus. "I'm Nina, your single heterosexual aunt, which doesn't seem possible." The single part, or the heterosexual part? The aunt part. He turned up his palms. "But that's the only part that's easy to explain. Heterosexuality you can't do anything about, of course, and the single part is presumably by choice, because you're very pretty, although maybe you have a terrible personality." "Do you?" "Awful," said Nina. "Okay, well, you'll have to work on that if we're going to be friends, because I have a very low tolerance for irritating people." "Me too." He seemed delighted. "Ah, another similarity. I love it. Genetics are so fascinating." Nina reached for her coffee. "Wait, do you want something to eat? We are in a cafe, after all." "Of course," he exclaimed. "I was so excited I forgot. I'll be right back." He got up and went to fetch food. Nina watched him charm the checkout girl, the older tourist couple he was next to in line, and the possibly also gay guy waiting for someone. There was something about Peter that was just open, in a way she wasn't. She found herself smiling at him as he came back. "Aren't you so excited?" He hugged himself. "I am beyond thrilled. When Saki called, I thought it was Christmas. You're totally going in my syllabus." "Saki?" "Sarkashan the lawyer." "Yeah, we call him that." "Do you see a lot of him?" "More than you would think. I'm afraid you've inherited one of the more bizarre family setups. Did you eat? You're going to need all your mental faculties." "Oh," said Nina, faintly. She reached for her coffee. "I wasn't hungry." "Here, have half my panini." "No one needs a whole panini." He looked around the room and spotted the guy who had smiled at him earlier. "I think that guy is checking you out." "No," said Nina, "he's checking you out." She picked up half of his sandwich and bit into it. Pesto ran down her chin and Peter handed her a napkin. "He's not, but it doesn't matter. I'm spoken for." Nina giggled. "You are?" Peter nodded. "I'm betrothed." "How old-fashioned of you." "Here's the thing," said her nephew. "I am an old man in a young and, let's face it, gorgeous man's body. I was born 56. It was very hard for me to be young. I hated it. It's only very recently I feel like I'm becoming who I was supposed to be, which is a middle-aged professor of anthropology with elbow patches." Nina looked at his jacket and raised her eyebrows. He made a face at her. "Okay, so this jacket doesn't have them, but I will find one that does, or find patches I can add, or something. That's not really the point. I'm wearing patches on my elbows all the time, even when I'm naked, metaphorically speaking." He shrugged. "The professor part is fine, I'm on the faculty at UCLA, and the age part is fine, I'm 33. Not yet in my prime, but getting there." He suddenly looked concerned. "Do you understand what I mean, or do I sound completely nuts?" Nina shook her head at him. "No, I totally get it. I think I was supposed to be born in the 19th century, or maybe Edwardian England. I should be wearing empire-waisted tea dresses and sitting in a window seat watching for carriages." "How old are you?" 29. "I'm your aunt, but younger than you. How is that possible?" Peter stared at her, then frowned. "When's your birthday?" "June 30th. He let out a low whistle. "Oh crap. That's not going to make things any easier." He leaned down and started rooting around in his briefcase, a large brown leather messenger bag that looked like it had seen some heavy use. He finally found what he was looking for and unrolled it onto the table, a long, laminated piece of paper covered in some kind of diagram. It was highly complicated. "You laminated it?" asked Nina. Not that she didn't love a laminator, she really did. She could frequently be found randomly laminating pretty pieces of fabric or paper to use as bookmarks. "Your margins are really even." "Thanks," he said. "No one's ever noticed my margins before." "You have beautiful margins," smiled Nina. "But I'm still not sure why it's laminated." She paused. "I'm not completely certain what it is." Peter looked surprised. "It's us. I mean, it's our family. It's laminated because I use it in class to explain how to construct a kinship diagram." A kinship diagram? A family tree is what we call it in the West, but in many cultures, degrees of kinship extend way beyond immediate or even secondary family. "Ah," said Nina, having no response to that. "However," said Peter, pointing to parts of the chart, "our chart is actually relatively shallow but very wide, which makes it interesting." He noted her bemused expression. "Perhaps only to me. Our family is extremely matrimonially extended, so it's a good demonstration of how interpersonal relationships are affected by changes in legal status." He shrugged. "Or not, as the case may be." He was clearly serious about this, but then he looked at her and grinned. "And now I get to redo the whole thing and add you, and as you are illegitimate, no offense, it's even better. I get to use dotted lines." "No offense taken. Can you give me a broad overview? I still don't understand the whole family bit." Nina was starting to wish she'd brought notepaper. "I'm having a hard time believing it." Peter nodded, finished his coffee, and said, "I can imagine it's a bit of a shock." Then he pulled a dry erase marker from his bag. "I have that brand," said Nina. "I find they streak so much less." "They really do, and I can't believe we're discussing it. Just think, we would be friends even if we weren't related, drawn together by our love of quality office supplies." He leaned forward and poked his pen at the top of his chart. "Okay, so here's William at the top, and here, ranged from left to right, are his 3 wives. The main reason the family is so wide is that he married for the first time at 20 and the last time at 60, and had kids each time, and those big gaps of time allow for 3 generations to be born, obviously." Nina had no idea what he was talking about, but nodded. "Obviously." Peter looked at her keenly, clearly used to students pretending to understand him. He sighed and reached into his bag again. "Here, let's try this instead. It sometimes helps." He slid a piece of paper across to her and handed her a pen. It was a Friday's iron, she was pleased to see, and then she was mildly embarrassed that she even noticed. "Put William at the top, and then draw a horizontal line all the way across." She did so. "Now, from left to right, leaving space, write Alice, then Rosie, then your mom's name. What is it, by the way?" "Candice." "Okay." He made a note on his laminated chart, the tip of his tongue poking out happily, like a little kid. "And then finally Eliza." "Done that?" He looked over and nodded. "Okay, now draw another horizontal line under their names, and put a big O&E on the far left." Nina did so, feeling on familiar ground now she was dealing with paper. "I like your lettering," said Peter. "Now, under Alice write Becky and Catherine. Under Rosie write Archie. Under Candice write Nina, and under Eliza write Millie. Then put another horizontal line." He sat back and puffed out his breath. "That is your generation. Those are your siblings, and they range from the oldest, my mother, Becky, who is 59, to the youngest, Millie, who is 10. Nina gazed at him. "No way." "Way. But, how is that possible?" He shrugged philosophically. It's possible because men can father children until they're really old, and for some reason, and this is less easy to explain, your father was so charming he persuaded 3 women to marry him and at least one other that we know of to sleep with him. Mind you, he added judiciously, I only knew him as an old man. He was pretty handsome in his youth. Nina said dryly, I imagine my mother wasn't the only one. Peter shook his head. I imagine you're right, but so far you're the only child out of wedlock we know about. He looked serious for a moment. But here's the problem, Archie is 30, and his birthday is in January. Nina looked at him, confused. So you were born while his dad was still married to his mom. In fact, based on your birthday, William slept with your mom while his wife, Rosie, was pregnant with Archie. Oh. Her mother had been right. So much for not remembering all that much about it. Peter nodded. O is right. And Rosie, sadly, is dead. Of cancer. A decade ago. And William and she seemed very happy together, and that's been the story all along, that Rosie was the love of his life, that they would have stayed married and had more kids, and it was all a big tragedy. And now it turns out he cheated on her and we have living physical proof. Which is you. Awesome. Yeah, said Peter. Not entirely sure how Archie's going to feel about it, but there's not much we can do to change it. Nina was silent. Shall we carry on? Asked Peter. There are 2 more generations to go. She nodded. Let me get more coffee and maybe a bun of some kind. Excellent idea. Grab me something fattening while you're up there, will you? Nina went and stood at the counter. She was feeling something new, something she was finding it hard to quantify. She turned and looked at Peter, who was texting on his phone and smiling at something. She liked him so much already, not in an I wonder if we'll be friends kind of way, but in a, she wasn't sure what it was. She got 2 more lattes and 2 chocolate eclairs. Ooh, good choice. I can see genetics are still working in our favor. There is nothing that isn't improved by laying a thick piece of chocolate frosting on top of it. Nina nodded, and realized what it was. They were related. She'd never experienced a relative before, apart from her mom, and Candice had never really warmed to the role. Presumably, if she and Peter had hated each other on sight it would have sucked, but she knew already that they were going to be connected forever. There was no confusion, no potential attraction, no time limit. It was a relationship she could understand and rely on. She felt relaxed. Which of course made her feel slightly worried. It shouldn't be as easy as this to like someone, right? Shall we continue? She drew a 3rd horizontal line, some way below all the names, and put a big 2 on the side. What an excellent student you are, Peter said, around a mouthful of eclair. Okay, so Becky had Jennifer and then me, Peter. He waved at himself, even though they were 2 feet apart. Catherine had Lydia, which is somewhat amazing, because my Aunt Catherine is a piece of work. She may have eaten her husband, he disappeared completely. According to my mother, one day he was there and the next day he was gone, leaving all his worldly possessions and his car keys behind. That's weird. Yeah. He paused. He took the dog, though. Nina nodded. Not a total loss then. Peter continued, my grandmother, Alice, is a nightmare. She looks like Miss Havisham, you know, from Dickens, but talks like something out of a Coppola movie. My mom is great, proving genetics aren't everything, but Aunt Catherine continues to be a strangely dressed homicidal maniac. Wow, don't hold back. Say what you really think. You'll see. My sister Jennifer is awesome, you'll love her, but my cousin Lydia is a fiend in human form, despite being a genius. Or maybe because she's a genius. She's not as bad as her mom, but let's call her challenging. Okay, let's get on with the chart. We have years for backstory. He licked the last of the chocolate off his fingers. But remember, don't go near my grandmother without a shiny shield to look into. One direct glance and it's masonry all the way. Damn. True story. Anyway, let's press on. Draw another line and put a 3. Nina did so. Peter turned his head to see her piece of paper. You could totally take my class. Okay, we're nearly done. Now you've reached my group, me, my sister and Archer's little boy, Henry, who is 2. No one else has any kids, so that's it for nieces and nephews. Great. Nina pushed the piece of paper away, but Peter pushed it back. Oh no, you're not done. You need another horizontal line. I don't have kids, but my older sister Jennifer has 3, little Alice, Jojo, and Louie. They're nearly teenagers, and they are drumroll, please your great-nieces and great-nephew. Nina looked at him. Wait, I'm someone's great-aunt Nina. Peter laughed. Yes. You are their great-aunt Nina. Which would be amusing to them if they didn't already have a great-uncle Archie, and a great-aunt Millie, who's younger than they are. He pointed his finger at her. And that is unusual, even to me. Then he pushed his cup and plate away and started to roll up the chart. I'm exhausted. Shall we go to the gift store? I hear they have paper clips shaped like rabbits and those old-fashioned pencils with all the colors inside one on top of the other. So that's what they did. After the shopping was over, Nina exchanged phone numbers with Peter and went home. She felt anxious about a potentially angry brother she hadn't even met yet, and worried that, through no fault of her own, she had ruined someone else's life. It was a whole new level of awkward, and she was someone who was pretty familiar with awkward. It had taken her previous record the time she'd attended a bar mitzvah by accident when she'd walked into the wrong synagogue. Beth El is not the same as Beth Am, in case you were wondering, looking for a friend's wedding and smashed it completely. She felt discombobulated, to use a word Liz liked, as if millions of voices had suddenly cried out in no, wait, that's Star Wars. She felt like she'd had a heart transplant. The original organ that usually felt stable in her chest, beating its way along and only occasionally skipping a beat, hello, Michael Fassbender, had been replaced by something that didn't feel as though it had been installed correctly. Nina told Phil the cat all about it, and he was horrified. Your dad isn't Richard Chamberlain from the Thornbirds? She stroked his head and shook her own. Or Magnum, P.I. Nina looked over at her wall. Phil wasn't really saying any of this, of course, because he's a cat and cats don't talk, but his voice in her head was listing her dream dads. She had headshots of all of them on her wall, a tribute both to their stellar work on television, and to the hopeful and imaginative little girl she'd once been. The 2 he'd mentioned were there, but also Commander Riker, whose real name she could never know, wait, Jonathan Frakes, Bruce Willis, Moonlighting, Not Die Hard, Alan Alda in MASH, and her personal favorite, Mark Harmon from Saint Elsewhere, though his character ended up dying of AIDS, which was a bit of a blow at the time. For her, not him. Throughout Nina's childhood, TV had been her second best friend, after books, and she had watched what her nanny Louise had watched, which meant mostly 70s and 80s shows, not counting Star Trek, TNG because Louise was a diehard Trekkie. She even liked Deep Space Nine. When Nina had been around 10, she'd gotten it into her little head that maybe one of these characters was her dad, and it became a game, sort of. She liked calling it a game, anyway, because if she actually thought about how much effort went into researching whether or not the potential dads in question were in Los Angeles when she was conceived, that would seem weird. Once she'd clarified that they were, she would cut out their picture and stick it in a box she had for the purpose. The dad box had become a bit of a thing for a while, because Nina had been an anxious kid, and had frequently needed to sit on the floor and dream about possibilities outside of her daily experience. Not that her daily experience was dreadful, it wasn't like she was ice fishing in the Bering Strait, or using her tiny child fingers to pick solder out of abandoned electrical products, but sometimes walking down the halls of elementary school had been terrifying. She had panicked a lot, and could still remember the time Louise called her mom and talked to her in a quiet voice about it. Then she'd hung up, turned to Nina, and said, "Your mom says breathe in a paper bag and tough it out." Then Louise had sat and rocked Nina on her lap, and she'd cried little Nina, not Louise, and a few days later Louise had gone out and bought a laminating machine and laminated the dads. Nina would take one to school with her every day, rotating through the roster so none of them would get upset, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is none of these witty, urbane, caring men were her dad. Her dad was just some guy who sounded like a total phallus. Phil pointed out that the sins of the fathers are not the sins of the child, and Nina replied that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Then they both fell asleep on the sofa. It had been a difficult day. 7. In which Nina meets a brother. As was often the case, Liz got hung up on the details. "You're the love child that's going to derail the whole plot of their lives." Nina nodded. "I'm afraid so. I didn't do it on purpose." "Of course not, but how often does one get a chance to be Jon Snow?" "Does that mean I know nothing?" "I think that was always the case. Your illegitimacy has no bearing." She smiled. "But maybe you'll inherit $1 million and will be able to pay off Mephistopheles." She pointed her finger at Nina. "You could be like little Lord Fauntleroy. Characters in books are always inheriting a fortune. It doesn't usually end well. Think of Charlie Kane in Citizen Kane. Or Isabel Archer in The Portrait of a Lady." Liz shrugged. "You're forgetting the greatest family of inheritors ever, the Beverly Hillbillies." Ellie Mae Clampitt's life was filled with joy. Joy and plenty of gingham. She looked Nina up and down. "You could totally pull it off." Nina asked, "Do we actually owe Mr. Mepho $1 million?" She hoped not. She loved her job at the store. Loved everything about the store, in fact. Liz shook her head. "No, it just feels like it." It was still pretty early. The store was open, but the only customer they had was a guy who lived nearby and had some kind of developmental disability. His name was Jim, and he had the sweetest smile and often hung out in the natural history section for hours looking at pictures of animals. Everyone knew him on the boulevard, and watched out for him and said hi, and as far as Nina knew, he thought he was a prince occasionally visiting his fiefdom to check on the peasants. The door to the store opened and Polly came in. Liz turned and frowned at her. "Good afternoon, Polly." Polly grinned. "Liz, it's 9:30. There's no one in the store except you two and Jim's here often enough that if there had been a rush, which there never, ever is, he could have filled in for me." Liz clicked her tongue but let Polly come over and hug her extravagantly, then went away hiding a smile. Polly was the other spinster of this parish who worked at nights, although spinster wasn't as accurate a description of her as it was of Nina. Polly was an actress. She worked at nights as a way to actually support her passion for movies, both being in them and watching them. She had come to LA when she was 19, a beautiful and hopeful girl with lots of charisma and even more talent, and then spent 10 years nearly making it. If she'd never gotten anywhere, she might have given up and been content to have given it a shot. However, in common with thousands of others, Polly would occasionally get a part in a commercial, or a pilot. She was always auditioning and getting called back, and would be frequently on avail, meaning that she was shortlisted for something and had to keep her schedule free for a day or so while they made a final choice between 2 or 3 girls. It's this occasional hit of success that makes for a real addict. The breakthrough was always imminent, there was always something about to happen. In the dim interstices between flashes of hope you make your life. Polly had been working at nights for a little over a year, and she and Nina had become friends, despite the fact that Polly never read books and only knew about plots from movies. For example, in the Harry Potter series, she had no idea Peeves the Poltergeist even existed, or that Ludo Bagman wasn't a luggage outlet, because those characters were totally cut out of the films. Being a lover of drama, Polly was deeply amused by Nina's sudden family situation. "Oh my God, you should write a screenplay." She laughed out loud. Not that anyone would share screen time with so many other people. You'd have to pare down the cast. "The whole point is the numerousness of them," Nina said, dryly. "Numerosity?" "There are a lot of them." Polly nodded. "Yes, there are. I've only met one of them, although he was pretty awesome." She told Polly about Peter. "Lucky," Polly said. "I had to borrow a gay relative from our neighbors." Her eyes misted over. "He took me shopping for prom." Another thought came to her. Are any of these new family members handsome single men? "I have no idea. I'll have to ask Peter and consult my chart." "There's a chart?" Nina nodded. "It's laminated." "Well, did you Google your dad at least?" She didn't wait for an answer, but pulled out her phone and got to work. Nina was used to her, and kept on unpacking book deliveries that had arrived that morning. There was no point telling Polly she'd already looked online, and besides, Polly was a whiz at searching. Her patience was rewarded. "Wow," said Polly with the air of that guy in the movie who is finally going to tie all the pieces of the plot together and whose refusal to do so up till then has led to either comical misapprehensions or mortal peril. "William Reynolds, your dad, was a very social butterfly." Nina nodded. "Thus the 3 wives. Plus possibly innumerable girlfriends." Nina turned up her hands, both of them holding books. "Unproven, but suspected. With evidence. Sitting on the floor in front of you." Polly turned her phone to face Nina. "Here's the most recent wife, by the way. The actual widow." She digressed. "If you're not married to someone and they die, are you an ex-widow?" "I don't think so," said Nina, looking at the image on Polly's phone. "What's her name? I can't read it from here. I knew I should have memorized that chart." "It's Eliza," said Polly. She read, "William and Eliza Reynolds attend the blah blah blah." Eliza was beautiful, and not as young and bimboish as Nina had imagined. Why had she imagined a bimbo? She chided herself. Honestly, had feminism taught her nothing? Why shouldn't a younger woman fall in love with an older man? Despite his enormous wealth and success. "I don't know why you're not more curious about your dad," Polly said. "This is precisely why the internet was invented. To research fathers." "Yes." Nina sighed. "I did look him up, there wasn't all that much there. He was a serial cheater and abandoner of children. What more do I need to know?" Polly shrugged. "Maybe he was really good at skiing and you've never even tried it and you could have had an entire Olympic career because you're naturally disposed to be good at it." Polly was charming, but not super grounded in reality. "Or," she said, warming to her theme, "what if he had some inheritable condition?" "I did think about that, but male pattern baldness isn't something I'm concerned about." "What about hemophilia?" "Well, firstly, hemophilia is carried by women and only dangerous to men, so I would be fine." "Think of your children. And you'd think anything important would have cropped up by now. And there's where you'd be wrong. I think you should talk to all of them carefully, and see what kind of hand you've been dealt." "I think you're nuts." Polly shrugged. "That might be true, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong." Polly apparently had more pull with fate than either of them realized, because that afternoon she and Nina looked up to see an incredibly handsome man walk through the door and approach them both with a great deal of purpose. They all looked at one another, and then the man said, to Nina, "You must be Nina Hill." Polly audibly hissed, but Nina wasn't going to let her down. "Chicks before dicks." "Yes, I am, and this is Polly Culligan." He looked at her and, to be fair, did pause for a half-second, but then he came back to Nina. I'm your brother. Archie Reynolds. Our father slept with your mother when my mother was pregnant with me. It's possible that someone somewhere has written cogent advice about how to respond to a statement like that, but if they have, Nina had never read it. So she stuck out her hand and said, pleased to meet you. Then she said, your mastery of pronouns is impressive, and regretted it. Struggling to recover, she added, I'm sorry about the infidelity thing, but I wasn't there at the time. He nodded. I understand that. You presumably arrived a few days or so later. Are you an obstetrician? Asked Polly, curiously. I'm sorry, said Archie. Well, Polly shrugged, we seem to be talking about the pacing of conception, and I thought maybe you had some expertise or something, because we just met and usually men like to take girls out to dinner before they talk about making babies. There was a pause. Nina hadn't been able to stop herself from imagining a Schoolhouse Rock-style sperm and egg animation, so she didn't have anything to say, but her brother laughed and had the courtesy to blush. His hair was very dark red like Nina's, and, like her, he blushed well. You're right, I'm being incredibly rude. He looked around, as if suddenly realizing he was in a public place, but fortunately for him the store was empty. I only just found out where you worked, Anne. He trailed off. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have marched in like that. Nina shrugged. I would probably have done the same. But you didn't, he said. Are you able to come and have a cup of coffee or something? Liz had apparat, as she frequently did. Honestly, she could be McGonagall's sister. Go ahead, Nina, she said. We'll struggle along without you. It will be hard, but we will try. Nina made a face at her and reached under the counter for her phone wallet combo thingy. Archie and Nina went across the street to the Belgian place, and Vanessa grinned at Nina when she handed them menus. Nina burst her bubble. Vanessa, this is my half-brother, Archie. Her dark eyes took him in, and after a second she nodded. I didn't know you had family in town. That makes 3 of us, he said, before Nina had a chance to. She narrowed her eyes. A brother who stole her lines was something she hadn't considered. They both ordered, also the same thing, then sat there and looked at each other with open curiosity. You look like me, Nina said, after a minute. A guy version, obviously. Thanks for clarifying, he said dryly, and, actually, you look like me. I'm a few months older, remember? He pulled out his phone and flicked to the gallery. And to be truthful, we both look like our dad. He handed her the phone. Their father, apparently, standing with his arm around the shoulder of a younger Archie, smiling for the camera in a pro-forma way. Point, smile, click, move away, drop the smile, get on with whatever important thing you had to do. You know the smile. William Reynolds had been handsome, his hair was thick and the same color as hers and Archie's, but his eyes were difficult to read. Maybe they'd been easier in person, but Nina was never going to find out. She said, I don't recognize him at all. I never saw a picture, never heard his name, never even knew my father was American. Their food arrived. The whole thing is blowing my tiny little mind. She shook out her napkin, her mouth watering at the smell of her croque madame. Grilled cheese in any form was her spirit animal. Archie pronged a lettuce leaf and chewed it thoughtfully. Yeah, me too. Can I ask you about your mom? Nina nodded, also chewing. She watched her new brother, noticing additional similarities between them, the cheekbones, the eyelashes. How strange, to have a brother all of a sudden. She remembered a friend of hers who had an older brother in high school, and how awesome that had been for her and all her friends. A steady supply of boys 1 or 2 years older paraded through the house for their inspection. Damn, that would have been nice to have. Maybe it wouldn't have taken her so long to lose her virginity. Archie sipped his water. What's she like, your mom? He paused. The homewrecker. Nina frowned at him. That's not fair, she didn't wreck your home at all. In fact, she had nothing more to do with your dad once she found out he was married. True. I withdraw the homewrecker comment. But what is she like? Nina thought about it. She's cool. She's a well-known photographer, you can look her up online. Candice Hill. That's how I usually find out where she is and what she's up to. She's Australian and travels all over the place, which is why I never knew where my dad came from. She never, ever mentioned him, except to say she wasn't sure who he was. Apparently, it was preferable for me to think she was promiscuous than it would have been for me to know my father, which is a weird choice. I didn't see much of her when I was a kid, and see even less of her now. She loved me, I guess, but she was busy. Nina took a bite of her croque madam and shamelessly talked while chewing. She carried me around everywhere when I was the size of a loaf of bread, but once I needed regular meals and got too big to sleep in a hotel drawer, she found an apartment here and hired Louise. Louise? The greatest nanny in the world. Her own kids were at college, and her husband irritated her, so she moved into our apartment to take care of me. Once I went to college, she moved to Georgia, to be closer to her grandchildren. She's my family, my regular cast member. My mom is more like a guest star. And now our father is like a character the other ones talk about. Right, but one that never shows up. His Godot. Or Guffman. Charlie in Charlie's Angels. Norm's wife in Cheers. Archie smiled. Well, he was around all the time when I was little. He worked a lot, but when he was there, he was really there. He had that way of making you feel you were the only person in the world. As long as you were right in front of him. He was a lawyer, right? Nina had seen that online but wasn't sure she was remembering correctly. Yeah, entertainment lawyer. He and 10,000 other guys in this town. He inherited money from his parents, then made lots more, threw parties, went to parties, drank a lot, glammed around, the usual thing. He was larger than life and really smart. I loved him. When my mom died, he was devastated. He frowned. But now all I can think of is how he had you the whole time and never paid any attention to you at all. I think that was my mom's doing, not his. Nina paused. Do you think your mom knew about me? Do you think he told anyone? Well, he told Sarkashin, because he put you in the will. He must have thought about you. He was pretty buttoned up, it's highly unlikely you slipped his mind. Nina waved at Vanessa and ordered an iced coffee. Archie did, too. Are you ordering the same thing as me on purpose? He shook his head. No, I guess we like the same things. We're like one of those twin studies, where they look at twins who were raised apart and yet turn out to have both married a woman named Darla. Not the same woman, hopefully. No, that would really be too coincidental. Were you a happy kid? Did you have a good childhood? Nina shrugged. More or less. I was shy. I'm still shy. I wasn't good at making friends. I got anxious at lot honestly, it would have been nice to have sisters and brothers and cousins and stuff back then. Now I'm not really sure what to do with you, although it feels nice to have a family for the first time. She looked at him thoughtfully. But maybe it's too late for me to really be part of yours. He shrugged. If you got married you'd join one. True. Nina thought about that. I could always pretend I married into you, so to speak. We could throw a wedding. He laughed. One thing that can be said for our family is that we love a wedding, or a birthday, or really any excuse for a party. We're a sociable lot, mostly. Nina fake shuddered. Or at least, she faked a fake shudder, because inwardly she was actually shuddering. I am not a party person. I'm an introvert. Don't worry, Archie responded. You can always say no. Nina went back to his question about her childhood. You know, as a kid I felt alone a lot, but I also really liked being alone, so, you know, it was fine. I spent a lot of time reading and lying on the living room rug watching TV. What about you? The iced coffee arrived, and they toasted each other instinctively. Archie took a sip and sighed. It was happy at first. I remember hanging out with my mom a lot, and kids from the neighborhood, but then my mom got sick and it got sad. I was still pretty young, but old enough to feel bad I couldn't do more to help. I got good at making tea. I got good at giving foot rubs. He looked at the table. I think I did more physical caring for another person during that period than I've ever done since, although I love my wife and son very much. He met her eyes again. Not sure what that says about me. They paused to consider this, then Nina ploughed on. And what about Eliza, your stepmother and now the widow? Archie shrugged. We only really got together all of us at the holidays, usually at our dad's instigation, so I don't know if we'll even do that anymore. I don't know her very well, they live on the other side of town. Santa Monica. Worse, Malibu. Might as well be Mars. They both nodded. Los Angeles is a big city, as everyone knows, but there is an even bigger divide between the west side and the east side. To get from east to west you have to cross under the 405 freeway. There's a stretch of Olympic Boulevard where you can see the 405 just ahead, a parking lot in bridge form, where it can take you over an hour to go 1 or 2 blocks because a portion of the traffic is going up the ramp to get on the freeway and blocking the way for everyone else. People have gone insane on that stretch. Whenever Nina was stuck there, which was rarely, because she would rather have filled her ears with flaming dog turds than go to the west side, she thought of that Andrew Wyeth painting Christina's World, where the young woman is lying on the hillside, dragging herself up toward a barn in the distance. That same sense of desperation and struggle and reluctant acceptance permeates the very air in that part of town. It is purgatory. Or limbo. Sartre said hell was other people, but that was only because the 405 hadn't been built yet. How long were they married? Nina realized she'd probably have to meet this woman, she might as well know more about her. Oh, a long time. Since 2000, maybe. Millie is 10, and she was born quite a few years after the wedding. He shrugged. Sorry, I'm not so good at dates. Millie is our half-sister. He laughed. You get used to it. We end up just using everyone's name and not worrying exactly how they related unless someone asks. Do people ask? Sometimes. People will say, is this your son, or is this your father? And you have to say, no, the little one is my brother and the older one is my nephew. Most people ignore it, but some people think about it for a minute and either demand a full explanation, which is a pain, or realize for themselves it means your father never stayed married for very long, and it gets awkward. Nina looked at him. Like now, you mean? It actually didn't feel awkward, it was as it had been with Peter. A weird feeling of knowing someone already, a total absence of the usual pressure she would feel with an attractive man, a kind of comfort. Archie's expression grew cooler. Yeah. That was Dad's dark side, unfortunately. He was funny and handsome and charming, but he was also a narcissistic loser. He married and left 3 wives and didn't seem to lose a night's sleep over any of it. He didn't leave your mom. And he didn't leave Eliza. But he cheated on my mom, and who knows about Eliza? The fact that you exist means there might be more of us out there. Archie shrugged. He always seemed so loving, but it was like he was 2 people, the one who was there in front of you, and the one he turned into the minute he left the room. The one in front of you loved you, at least. Yeah, but the other guy always won in the end. He reached up his hand and called for the check. Back in her apartment that night, Nina sat in front of her bulletin board and stared at it. She looked up other people's visualization and organization practices on Pinterest and realized hers was woefully in need of updating. At the very least, she was now a different social being, someone with a family. Someone who might need to write down more birthdays, for example. Or have more invitations to decline. Concerned, she started looking at bullet journaling instead, to see if maybe that would work better for her new, wider circle. Honestly, you couldn't turn your back on the internet for a minute. There were, 14,000 pins about bullet journaling, which was a way of laying out a daily planner to be more, something. Prettier? More efficient? Nina leaned back against the wall and started daydreaming. How did this whole thing come about? Who was bullet journalist zero? Who was struggling to capture and condense everything about their life using traditional journaling methods, which are what? Lists, calendars, and thought, hey, wait, let's do it this way instead, and spawned a worldwide phenomenon. Nina imagined a young woman, let's call her Brooke, the kind of basic girl that Nina both despised and envied, a woman who understood contouring and highlighting, and followed people on Instagram who cared passionately about tiny niche verticals such as, for example, contouring and highlighting, and who had a boyfriend with a YouTube channel about his crazy life with his 3 husky puppies and his hot, contoured, organized girlfriend. Imaginary Brooke considered herself a boss, but at the same time enjoyed the girly things of life, the cushions, the candles, the body glitter, and the trending Starbucks drink. Having created the concept of bullet journaling, Brooke would then spend months perfecting her art, learning awesome new calligraphy styles, taking fantastic photos and posting them, and watching the rest of the internet take her idea and run with it. Finally, she would start a company selling blank notebooks, Japanese pens, tiny stickers, and templates so her followers could bullet journal in their own, unique way within a Brooke-approved design framework. Brooke Co. would spawn a whole lifestyle channel on some upstart streaming network, and Brooke would retire at 40, having married and divorced husky guy, who, it turned out, only really liked young dogs, and live a life filled with meaning, joy, and meaningfully joyful accessories. Nina hated her. Having invented and disposed of Brooke, Nina decided to love the one she was with, and stick with a regular bulletin board. She sat there a second, considering her goals. Okay, brain, keep it simple. She want to drink less wine and more water. Nina wrote that down, then refilled her wine glass. Baby steps. She wanted to exercise more. This is easy, she thought, it turns out I have lots of goals. She looked up couch to 5K plans and printed one out, pinning it to her board. She considered buying new running shoes. Then she found an article that said walking was as good as running and felt good about saving $100 by not buying running shoes. She wanted to eat more vegetables, so she printed out a picture of broccoli and stuck that up. Why was broccoli the poster child for all vegetables? It must have a good agent or something, because she saw it everywhere. Big giant heads. Little bouncy florets. Kale had given it a run for its money for the last couple of years, but broccoli stayed focused and maintained its brand. Good for it. Nina put a prettier push pin on the picture of broccoli, and felt supportive. She wanted to date the guy from Quizzed. She drank her wine and considered that. She hadn't realized it was a goal, per se, until that moment, which proved that mood boards were good for something, haters be damned. Then she searched for good first date restaurants on the east side of Los Angeles and printed that out. Then she threw it away and printed out a picture of a baby penguin. Then she added a picture of a baby Russian dwarf hamster sitting in someone's hand, because it made her go squee. Then she spent a full, fat 20 minutes looking at photos of small mammals and baby animals in general, then drifted into videos of soldiers returning from war to their dogs, which made her cry. Then she realized she was vampiring other people's feelings, and that made her feel bad about herself, and suddenly the whole mood board made her cry, and so she went to bed. Why did she want to go out with that guy, anyway, when she could barely make it through an evening alone. A boyfriend was the last thing she needed. Therapy was what she needed. Therapy and maybe a Boston Terrier. Or a French Bulldog. One of those ugly yet adorable dogs. Tomorrow would be better. At the very least, tomorrow would be different. 8. In which Nina views other people's inner animals, then goes on safari. The next week passed uneventfully, which is not to understate the high level of energy that normally prevails on Larchmont Boulevard. A third juice bar opened. The hat store had a sale on berets. Rite Aid changed their seasonal display to bunnies and chickies. It wasn't exactly a never-ending cavalcade of light and motion, but it was change. However, the high spot was definitely the author's evening at Nights, on Saturday night. Author's Nights meant setting out a load of chairs, which meant moving bookcases and putting out plastic cups of warm white wine or plates of crackers and sweaty cheese, then standing there ready to sell multiple copies of the author's books so he or she could sign them. It wasn't hard, and sometimes the authors were fun, but occasionally Nina wasn't in the mood, and this was one of those evenings. It didn't help that the staff weren't supposed to drink the wine, but that night Nina was so cranky Liz actually urged her to break her own rule. "You're being a pill, Nina," she said. "Have a drink and chill out. This book is fun, the author is hopefully fun, and you're not a child soldier in Rwanda, so get a grip." Liz was right, of course. She had a variety of these comparisons. Aside from the child soldier, Nina had also not been a 12th century Catholic martyr, a tribute from a forgettable district in the Hunger Games, Scout's Halloween ham costume, and the first one voted off the island. You had to stay on your toes with Liz. She could throw any number of references at you, and you had to be ready for them. Nina tried to pull herself together. She'd been irritable all week. Either her period was coming or she had a brain tumor, and at that moment the tumor felt more appealing, which probably meant it was her period. "Okay, you're right. What's the book again?" Liz sighed at her. "Unleash Your Inner Animal" by Theodore Edwards. Teddy Edwards. His inner animal is presumably a stuffed bear. Liz looked at her employee and narrowed her eyes. "One drink, Nina." Theodore Edwards turned out to be the least cuddly-looking teddy that Nina had ever seen, tall and angular, with a tiny goatee and an actual pair of pince-nez on a long handle. Wait, that might make them lorgnettes. Hold on, yes, lorgnettes are the ones with handles. Anyway, he had a pair of those, plus the aforementioned tiny beard, and the overall effect was one of a highly affected praying mantis who was going to peer at you closely before biting your head off and dabbing his chin with a handkerchief. You might not have felt this way about him, but Nina had a rich imagination to compensate for her lack of spending money. As the crowd started to filter in, Nina noticed that they were mostly older women, and by older she meant 50s and up. She was as biased as the next person, unconsciously or not, and made the assumption that this was going to be a quiet evening. She looked around for Liz, saw her engrossed talking to a customer, and slipped a second cup of wine. Shuddering, because it was really piss-poor and warm to boot, Nina dropped the cup in the trash and kept herself busy walking around with the rest of the tray. Everyone helped themselves, and the atmosphere warmed up. People seemed to know one another. There was a lot of hugging and eye-widening. Liz checked her watch, then stepped up to the front of the room, where Theodore Edwards was already perched on a stool, cleaning his antennae. Not really, just joking. His antennae were already clean. Nina found herself wanting to giggle, and realized she should have stuck with one glass of wine. Liz said, "It's my pleasure to present Theodore Edwards, whose book Unleash Your Inner Animal hit the New York Times bestseller list this week." Everyone applauded, and Nina took a closer look at the book. It seemed to be a non-fiction, self-help kind of thing. She put it down and paid attention, like she was supposed to. Theodore cleared his throat. His voice was surprisingly deep and attractive, and made him seem less like a praying mantis and more like a bear or something, dressed as a praying mantis. "Welcome, fellow animals, he said. What a pleasure to see so many of you here, ready to look inward and encourage your secret animal to come out and be free. Nina wondered idly if she should have put out a litter tray. Teddy amped up his delivery. Civilization has crushed so many of us, and driven us away from our place in the natural world. It's hard to even remember we are mammals, just part of life's great chain of being, fearful of predators, hungry for our prey, lusting for our fellows. Nina looked at Liz. Her eyebrows had contracted slightly, and Nina saw her flip over her copy of the book to read the description, as she herself had. Theodore continued. As I had hoped, people are embracing both the book and their inner beasts, and around the country, chapters of hum animals, as I call them, have sprung up to reacquaint themselves with their wilder side. Oh God! Nina had a bad feeling about this. So, let's take a moment to greet each other properly, shall we? And with that, but without any further warning, he tipped back his head and roared like a lion. Liz and Nina froze, their jaws dropping open as the entire room erupted into growls, bellows, and, impressively, convincing whale song. Nina looked frantically at Liz, who had backed up against the nearest bookcase. She caught Nina's eye and mouthed, "Save me," but there wasn't anything the younger woman could do. Theodore stopped roaring and raised his hand to his ear, encouraging his readers, willing acolytes in the temple of crazy, to bellow louder. They complied. Nina covered her ears and started giggling uncontrollably. People were stopping in the street, a crowd was forming outside the door. It was a pity she hadn't set out more chairs. And then, hum animals. Let's prance. Theodore leaped from his stool and started prowling about, and with a resounding crash of wooden folding chairs, his audience followed suit. It was pretty much downhill from there. After the animals had left, the chairs had been folded and returned to the back room, and Liz had taken 4 Tylenol. Nina was allowed to leave. It's Saturday night, she said to Nina. You should run along before I have a coronary and you have to waste the entire night in the emergency room. Do you think you actually might? Nina paused. Liz wasn't old, but it had been a somewhat challenging author's evening. I doubt it. Run along, little doggy. She waved her hands. I see someone trampled cheese into the carpet in the young adult section, and it's going to be relaxing digging it out with my fingernails. Off you go. Nina made a break for it. Saturday nights Nina had a ritual. She went home, fed Phil, had a shower, got dressed, and headed out into the night to sink her teeth into the neck of any virgins she could find. Clearly, this isn't true. There are no virgins out on Saturday night in LA. No, Nina would grab her camera and go out to take pictures. One of Nina's few early memories of her mother was when Candice had taught her to recognize a moment worth photographing. They'd sat together in a crowded spot, and Candice had pointed out the images that appeared every so often in the patterns of people around them. It was a pleasant memory, and although Candice tended to take photos of war zones, starving children, or miners covered in toxic chemicals, Nina preferred to take photos of her hometown. Los Angeles was famous for its intoxicating mix of riots and red carpets, but the city she saw was very different. Bear in mind, Los Angeles is an unnatural oasis. It was built in and on the desert floor of a long mountain valley, which slopes gently east to west into the Pacific Ocean. Native American tribes settled the valley over 7,000 years ago and lived in relative peace until the Spanish showed up and ruined it all. Eventually, the movie industry arrived, driven there by Thomas Grabby Edison, who held a monopoly on all things movie-related on the East Coast, and wasn't averse to breaking a few legs to maintain it. The movie business really caught on. Those people who move like jerky ants in old footage-built studios and houses and bigger houses and then swimming pools, and before you knew it, the Kardashians. This is a blatant simplification and compression of over a century of development, but the point is that people basically arrived and laid a carpet of tarmac and trash over the top of a beautiful but somewhat surprised natural world. Too polite to point it out, nature simply continued to go about her business and ignored us the way we largely ignore her. But she's still working, like the experienced old performer she is. Hike up into Griffith Park in spring, for example, and you'll suddenly find yourself alone apart from 4 squillion birds, winding down from their day and chattering over a postprandial brandy or whatever it is birds wind down with. A buttercup filled with dew. A half acorn filled with honey. It's more likely they're sipping rainwater from the crumpled edge of a Coors Light can, but whatever it is, it's rocking their world, because they are singing their feathery little butts off. Sometimes, if she were sitting very still, Nina would see a raccoon, or a coyote, or a jackrabbit, all trying not to be seen and freezing when they noticed her, then dissolving away like Homer Simpson sliding back into the hedge. As the light dwindled, palm trees and distant buildings would become black silhouettes against an impossibly rosy backdrop. Sunsets are beautiful in California, the cornflower blue of the sky diluting as the light fades into a teenage girl's pastel palette of nail colors. The whole world is familiar with big bold daytime LA, the blinding sun, the girls in shorts and roller skates, the traffic. They know nighttime glamorous LA, too, the paparazzi with their shouts and flashes, the starlets with their cleavage and heels. But only Angelinos get to see LA as she's waking up and going to bed, and like many beautiful women, she looks best with her makeup off. That evening, Nina could see the jacarandas were having their usual giddy effect. Every May, jacaranda trees burst into flower in an improbably riotous display of color. Ranging from deep purple to the palest violet, they bloom together on some prearranged schedule, so one night Angelinos go to bed in Kansas and wake up in Ounce. They're all over the city, hundreds of them, but until they bloom, they're totally unremarkable. Like dozens of transformation scenes in movies from My Fair Lady to Mean Girls, jacarandas are the previously plain girl who suddenly gets a makeover and emerges triumphant to turn everyone's head. They don't last long, but while they're there, people smile more. They flirt more. They feel spring in their step and summer in their underpants. Nina hid behind her camera and watched people crowd together, or sail alone down the street, looking at one another from the corners of their eyes, noticing and seeing and ignoring like any herd congregating around a water hole. She never felt more contented than she did when she was seeing and taking pictures and being invisible. She thought maybe owls felt the same way, but she couldn't turn her head 270 degrees, which was a total bummer. Anyway, once the light had gone, she would take this happy feeling of peace and purpose with her to the movie theater, where she would sprinkle herself with heavily buttered popcorn and then spend the whole movie picking it out of her teeth. The ArcLight was a Hollywood institution, a movie theater with great seats and amazing sound, plus the usual healthy range of unhealthy movie snacks. Nina loved going to the movies alone, even though Saturday night was always crowded. It turned out it wasn't Polly who had the pull with fate, it was Nina, because the first person she saw as she walked into the movie theater lobby was the guy from Your Wizard, Harry. No, she said to herself. Ignore him. But then he looked up and saw her and smiled. Unbeknownst to her, he'd seen her, thought she was someone he knew, smiled, then realized she was someone he knew. She was that quiz girl who knew everything and not actually a friend of his, but by then it was too late because she was smiling back at him. Uncertainly, but definitely smiling. Crap, thought Tom. She's really so pretty. Crap, thought Nina. He's gorgeous. Crap, thought Lisa, the girl from Quizzard, who had walked into the lobby to meet Tom to see a film and immediately saw Tom and Nina smiling at each other in a strained fashion across a 20-foot distance. Go! She thought to herself, or rather to Tom, go talk to her. But he wasn't moving, and the girl wasn't moving, and so Lisa decided she needed to take matters into her own hands. Hey, Tom, she called out, raising her hand. Oh, thank God, thought Tom, though he was also a little annoyed with himself. Why couldn't he have gone and said hi, made a new friend? What was this, kindergarten? Ah, thought Nina, He is dating that girl from his team, which we all know is suicide for team cohesion, and that's that. Not that there was any that there in the first place, of course. And then she realized the girl from Quizzard was walking toward her with a big, broad smile on her face. Behind her, Tom was wobbling in his trajectory, thrown by Lisa's sudden darting movement. His sneakers squeaked on the polished concrete floor. "Hey there, I know you, don't I?" Nina was a full adult, capable and competent in many ways, but this simple greeting made her blush and get flustered. "Oh, well." "From Trivia League, right," said Lisa, holding out her hand. "I'm Lisa. Our team beat your team last week." Nina nodded, shaking her hand. "Yes, I remember. I'm Nina." She paused. "January the 1st. "I'm sorry?" Lisa shot a quick glance over her shoulder to make sure Tom was coming over. He wasn't. She micro-frowned at him, and he started to move. "Racehorses. January the 1st. That's how you won." "With racehorses?" "Yes. You won with a question about racehorses." Nina was starting to feel a little desperate for this conversation to be over. The good-looking guy was approaching. It was too late. "That's right," said Lisa, smiling at Nina as if the two of them had known each other for EVS. Then Tom joined them and Lisa revealed herself as the manipulative mastermind she truly was. "Oh, hey, Tom, this is Nina. Do you remember her from Quiz League?" Of course. Tom had had an additional 15 seconds to compose himself, and felt utterly capable of exchanging pleasantries and walking away. "I'm Tom. Nice to meet you properly, if you know what I mean." Nina shook his hand, feeling her systems coming back online. "The feeling is mutual." "No, Nina. What the hell was that? Why do these stupid phrases come out of your mouth? What's next? Gum would be perfection." "So, here's the weirdest thing," said Lisa. "I can't see the film after all, so here, have my ticket and you guys can go together." She pushed her ticket into Nina's hand and started to back away. "No," Tom yelped. "Great, Tom, attractive noise. Let's hope she's got a secret fetish for yodeling." "Why? You texted me like 10 minutes ago saying you were looking forward to it." "I have a sudden headache," said Lisa. "I have Advil in my bag," said Nina, also in a somewhat higher voice than normal. "I can't take ibuprofen. Sorry, upsets my tummy." Lisa looked apologetic, but she was still unmistakably backing away. "I also have Tylenol," said Nina, starting to rummage. "Can't take acetaminophen, either. Deathly allergic." "Allergic to Tylenol?" asked Tom, trying to remember if she'd mentioned this in the nearly 20 years they'd been friends. "Yes, terribly. I'll drop dead on the spot." Lisa shrugged, which Nina thought made for a pretty casual reference to sudden death. "Maybe you need caffeine," suggested Tom. "Or something to eat." "Or you can get a rain check," suggested Nina, looking now to Tom for support. They didn't want to see a film together, did they? Lisa looked at the clock above the movie board. "Too late. Movie starts in 3 minutes. Run along." "I don't think that's how rain checks." "Gotta go," said Lisa, clutching her head. Starting to lose consciousness. "Got to get to a darkened room and an ice bag ASAP. See you guys." And then she turned and essentially ran away. Not literally running, obviously, because that would have been bizarre, but definitely speed walking. Tom and Nina stared after her. Then Nina looked down at the ticket in her hand. "Space spiders on Mars?" She raised her eyebrows, and looked up to see Tom watching her. "Not a sci-fi action movie fan," he said, with a note in his voice that suggested he wasn't surprised. He looked up at the board. I bet you were going to see Miss Eglantine Expects, weren't you? One of those movies where the corsets are tighter than the fight choreography. Nina frowned. He was right, but she wasn't going to admit it. No, actually, I'm here for Bloody Deadly Blood Death 3, The Blood Rises. Really? He had started the word sounding surprised, but by the end of it he was sarcastic. Yes. She gazed up at him, popsicle cool, though she suddenly wished she hadn't gone in this direction and had simply offered to buy the popcorn. He was really attractive, and now he thought she was. She didn't know what he thought. His expression was unreadable, not that she was all that good at reading people, anyway. She started to feel the familiar signs of imminent panic. Tingling hands. Mild nausea. Tom was thinking he didn't believe Nina about Blood Death 3, but it was clear she didn't want to watch a film with him. He wanted to stop bickering with her but wasn't sure how. He opened his mouth to suggest something, and then she suddenly thrust the ticket back at him, and turned and walked out. He watched her go, realizing for the first time that he really was attracted to her and that she apparently hated him so much she was willing to break all social conventions and walk away without a word. As she walked toward Vine Street, Nina realized she had done exactly what Lisa had done, and giggled a little, somewhat hysterically. She was starting to calm down, but her palms were still tingly. Her anxiety had gotten better in the last several years, once she'd started to use a planner and keep a schedule and basically try to control every aspect of her life, but it was always curled up at the base of her spine like a sleeping cat. Any step off the normal path, any deviation from standard, and it started lashing its tail. Suddenly, she wanted to cry. She'd been doing so well, but clearly she wasn't one of those people who could be spontaneous, and that was going to have to be okay. She didn't want complexity in her life, and with work and the new weird family thing, she definitely didn't have space for a boyfriend. Time to go back into hiding. 9. In which Nina gets schooled by well-meaning but ill-informed children. You did what? I just turned and walked away. Polly stared at her. But, wait, I thought you liked this guy. Or rather, I thought he was cute and, therefore, you might like him once you got to know him. There was the possibility of liking. Nina nodded. It was the following Monday, there were no customers in the store yet, and Polly had shown up on time for once. Polly continued, and yet, when you had a chance to talk to him, you walked away. Right. Polly narrowed her eyes. So I'm struggling with this. Talk me through it. Nina sighed. I went to the movies, alone. I saw him there. Weird circumstances involving a girl on his trivia team meant suddenly the two of us had tickets to the same movie, then I freaked out and walked away. Without a word? Silently, yes. No pathetic excuse, even. No, I have a headache. Nina shrugged. The other girl beat me to that one, and I was freaking out, remember? Polly shook her head. It's amazing to me you ever get laid at all. It's amazing to me, too. When was the last time? We're not talking about this. We are. I can hear us. No. Nina walked away toward the stock area, to grab some books that needed shelving, or something. Anything. Well, said Polly's voice from behind her, if it's any consolation, you have a great walking away view. Walking away makes your butt look awesome. Good to know, called Nina. I'll make sure I always keep attractive men behind me. She paused. You know what I mean. Sadly, said Polly, I do. At the end of the day, Nina started to set out the beanbags for the elementary book club. She'd been feeling irritable and sad all day, but she knew the generous application of little girls would distract her perfectly. All right, young one, said Liz, pulling on her battered Dodgers baseball hat. It's an important game, and I am so out of here I am basically a dot on the horizon. Nina frowned at her. You're still very much in front of me. Liz replied, and yet my heart is already in the stadium, a hot dog in its hands, ketchup on its chin. Does a heart have a chin? Some have several. I, however, am slender and lissom, so mine only has the one. And with this utter ridiculousness over, Liz touched the brim of her cap and left the store. Nina stared after her for a moment and shook her head. Honestly, that woman was a lunatic. Do you need any help? Nina looked up to see Annabelle, one of her book club ladies, as she called them. Annabelle was 10, a serious child, with deeply held beliefs and unwavering suspicions. Sure, said Nina. Can you grab the extra beanbags from the office? Nina had started out using regular chairs, but everyone had been silent and reserved. Beanbags worked much better. Annabelle knew where they were kept. This was the first book club she'd joined, but she was one of those kids who were geared toward mastery. She wanted to know how you did it, then she wanted to do it herself. Logan came in. Logan was also 10, though she went to a different school than Annabelle. They looked at each other and Logan smiled first. Annabelle smiled back, and said hi. Logan followed her back into the office, and they both came back with the final pair of beanbags, not saying anything. Nina was often surprised by how tentative and shy 10-year-olds were. She had been like that herself, but all the other girls had looked so much more confident than she'd felt. They would greet one another enthusiastically, play together at recess, argue passionately, and hug. She had always marveled at them, and wondered if maybe her mom had been supposed to apply for some kind of training for her, something she'd forgotten to do because she was so busy. Other people's moms had clearly equipped them better. Then she would feel guilty for feeling that way, and retreat further into her books and TV shows and solitude. The door flew open and Nora and Una came in, full of chatter and giggles. They were the same age, and had known each other since preschool. Just behind them were Asher and Ruby Fern, another pair of friends. They were all dressed in regulation girl power ensembles, with fully empowered whimsical touches, rainbows, fake fur, glitter, unicorns, pictures of Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Amelia Earhart, enamel pins of donuts or sloths or foxes. Check, check, check. This age was the last hurrah of individualism. Already they dressed like one another, but usually because they saw something and loved it. Icons or fabrics blew like a breeze through every classroom in the land, and parents, happy to get a request they could fulfill with a simple trip to Target, went out and bought every girl's Rule the World t-shirt they could. Nina wondered how much good it would do once hormones rolled up and kicked the doors down. Her own observation of middle school girls was that they dressed alike in order not to be separated from the pack and eviscerated online, which was an entirely different motivation than OMG, that sloth is so cute. She looked at her watch. It was time to start. She locked the front door. Nothing was more distracting to book club than customers wandering about, and went to the office to get the goldfish crackers and bottled water that constitute the mortar of childhood. Who wants to start? She asked when she returned and sat down on her own beanbag. The book that month was The Mysterious Benedict Society, one of her favorites. Seeing as she got to pick the books they read, this was hardly surprising. Nora stuck up her hand. Nora was a highly creative little girl, who never hesitated to share her thoughts. As they were usually sharp and insightful, nobody minded, and in this group the kids had clearly decided she was the leader. I loved this book, but it made me really frustrated. Why is it always kids who have to solve stuff? Please clarify, requested Nina. Nora tipped her head to one side. Well, in real life kids don't get to do anything much on their own, right? She looked around at her peers, all of whom nodded. Parents drive you places, there are teachers and babysitters and whatever. But in books, little kids are always doing things. In this one, they take weird tests and join a secret society and save the world. They don't have parents, said Logan. Not proper ones. None of the kids in books do. She counted on her fingers. They are usually dead, or evil, or distracted and busy. Junie B. Jones has parents. Ramona Quimby has parents, Nina said. Yes, replied Logan, but those kids do regular stuff. I'm talking about when the kids do awesome stuff. Stuff that 9 or 10-year-old kids never really get to do. Like fly on a bat and fight rats like Queen Loser in the Gregor books. Or travel through space like Meg in A Wrinkle in Time. Annabelle clearly agreed with Logan on this one. Let's try and stick to this book. Nina sometimes let them ramble on about all the books they loved, because she enjoyed that conversation as much as they did, but she was trying to be more grown up about it. Sticky has parents, though. Asher waved her copy of the book. Right? Logan nodded. He does, but he thinks they don't want him anymore. Which is worse than not having any, said Annabelle. Definitely, said Ruby Fern. And Kate has a dad, but she doesn't know it. What about Miss Paramore? Asked Nina. Isn't she like a mother to Raineye? There was a sudden knocking on the store's front door, which scared the applesauce out of all of them. One of the girls actually squeaked. From where they were on the floor, they couldn't see the door, but Nina stood and saw a man standing outside. The early evening sun was behind him, so she couldn't get a good look at his face, but she started over to let him know the store was closed. The parents wouldn't be here to pick up the kids for nearly another hour, but maybe it was one of them. It wasn't. It was Tom. From Quizzard. That Tom. What? The actual heck? Is that a friend of yours? Asked Ruby Fern, from a foot or two behind her. Nina turned and discovered the whole book group had followed her to the door, drawn helplessly by their adaptive need to stick their beaks into anything new. Not really, replied Nina. She reached the door and frowned at Tom, wondering why he was there. Tom, who was wondering exactly the same thing, waited until the door was open and then held up the movie ticket. This is yours. I was in the area, so I thought I'd bring it back. Ah, said Nina, we're closed. Yes, Nina, let's open a conversation with a non sequitur. Stylish. Asher said, are you Nina's boyfriend? She was a tall, clear-eyed child who stuck to the point. Tom, who was a little confused by the 6 girls who were now all staring avidly at him, shook his head. Are you a boy who is also a friend? Ruby Fern wasn't going to let him slip by on a technicality. Said Tom. Maybe he wants to be her boyfriend, suggested Logan. And Nina doesn't want him to be. Or maybe she wants him to be, but hasn't told him yet. All the little heads swiveled to look up at Nina, who was approximately the color of a strawberry. Ladies, she said in her firmest voice, please return to the book club area and wait quietly. I won't be a minute. No, it's okay, said Nora. We're fine here. Nina looked at them with her best laser beam eyes, and they all backed away. Tom was starting to lose focus. Anyway, I thought you might want to go see another movie sometime. He held out the ticket, and Nina took it, trying to decide if he had asked her to go see another movie sometime with me or had simply been making an observation. I saw you at the movie theater, alone, so here's a ticket you can use in the future, on your own. Thanks. But this is really your friend's ticket. She bought it. He shook his head. No, she gave it to you, so I turned it in for a rain check. He smiled suddenly, and Nina felt her hand start to prickle with a combination of anxiety and attraction. He appealed to her so much. He was very tall and strong, all bones and mass. He made her feel like she wouldn't be up to the task of even holding his hand, let alone anything else. And why was she thinking of anything else? He spoke again, slightly more hesitantly. You left somewhat abruptly. She blushed. Yeah, sorry about that. I had to leave. Somewhat abruptly. Yeah. There was no way she was going to explain any further. It was bad enough already. Anyway, thanks. She smiled back at him and went to close the door. I have to get back to my book club before I start hyperventilating and have to breathe into a bag. Oh, they're not all your children. He tried a smile. He could smell her shampoo, honey and lemons. He was having trouble with this simple social transaction. Her shiny hair, her tiny hands and feet, her very smallness made him feel clumsy and awkward, like he should be carrying a bale of hay with a straw between his teeth and saying things like shucks, I have to move the she-cow back to pasture. She was smiling at him. Keep your head in the game, Tom. I'd have to work pretty hard to have 6 kids the same age. Her eyes were hazel, he saw, a warm brown with a darker ring around her iris. Distracting. He said, modern science. Really, Tom, you're talking about fertility treatment? What's next? Asking her what brand of tampon she prefers. Well, sure. They stood there smiling at each other, both frantically trying to think of something to say that wouldn't make them look as stupid and confused as they felt. See, said Asher, from behind the bookcase. They're definitely flirting. My older sister looks like that when she's texting sometimes. She sounded gleeful. Usually just before my mom takes her phone away. Tom and Nina looked over. 6 little heads were peeping over the bookcase, like a row of ripening avocados on a windowsill. They ducked down again, and giggling was heard. She looked back at Tom and shrugged. Sorry, they can't help it. I have to go. He nodded. Yes, well, anyway. She said, yeah. He said, see you at trivia. She said, sure. He said, bye then. She said, bye, thanks for the ticket. He said, it was yours. I was returning it. She said, I know, but still. He said, got it. Bye. She said, bye. He said, see you. She said, yeah. She closed the door and turned to face the kids. They had popped back up and were looking at her over the top of the bookcase again. Nora was the first to comment. Sister, she said, you need to work on your banter. When Annabelle's mother, Lily, came to pick her up, she seemed stressed. Nina had always liked this mom, attractive without working at it, casually dressed, funny and mellow. But this evening she was rushing. Her hair was escaping from her bun in a way that had moved from messy to imminently undone. Nina itched to tuck it all in but managed to keep her hands to herself. Not everyone enjoys symmetry and control like you do, she reminded herself. Belle, come on, baby, we've got to hustle. Lily was hunting in her giant handbag for something. Why? Asked Annabelle. She wasn't giving her mother attitude, she was just wondering. Because I need to get home and finish those 40 individualized packets of seeds to use as place markers at Tantis' wedding. Lily finally pulled out her car keys and looked at her watch. And I literally need your help and you have to go to bed like an hour ago, which means I have to use child labor while also breaking child labor regulations about sufficient sleep. Annabelle frowned at her. There are no child labor regulations about sleep in California. Oh, I'm sure there are, chimed in Nina, who was picking up the beanbags. You can't work at all until you're 14. But what about the sleep part? Nina looked at Lily over Annabelle's head. I think those regulations vary from state to state. Annabelle turned from Nina to her mom and narrowed her eyes. What exactly does helping involve? Coloring in, tying ribbons, stickering, checking things off a list. Ooh, that sounds awesome, said Nina, unable to help herself. Seriously, Lily had just rattled off 4 of her favorite activities. Annabelle grinned. Well then, there you go. Nina can help you and California won't get mad. Lily appeared embarrassed. Belle, I'm sure Nina has plenty to do this evening. Actually, no, said Nina. You live in the neighborhood, right? I don't mind helping, I love all that crafty and organizy stuff. You do? Lily looked almost comically grateful. It's not my game at all. Well, the crafty part is okay, but I keep freaking out that I'll forget someone or something and it's really important. Nina laughed. Well, let me put away the rest of the stuff and close up the store, and I'll meet you out front in 10 minutes. You're a goddess in human form, said Lily. She's not very good at flirting, though, said Annabelle, firmly. She looked at Nina. My mom has a boyfriend. Maybe she can help you. Lily looked at her daughter in mild horror. We're going to get ice cream. We'll see you in a little bit. As they walked out of the store, Nina watched them pause after a few steps and tried not to lip-read Lily telling her daughter to not comment on people's personal lives. Good luck with that, she thought. 10. In which Nina is helpful. Lily lived fairly close to Larchmont, but nonetheless they drove, because it was Los Angeles. Besides, Lily had groceries, art supplies, and a giant bag of dog food to carry inside, so it was just as well Nina was there. Oh, you have a dog, said Nina, thrilled. She would love to have a dog, even though Phil the cat might not approve. She couldn't stop herself from squatting down to greet Lily's clearly ancient Labrador. That's Frank, said Lily. He's a shameless food whore, yours for a single kibble. Frank gazed into Nina's eyes, trying to convince her to run away with him to a butcher's shop. She smiled at him and rubbed his ears until he made grumbly noises at her. Coffee? Asked Lily, putting away the groceries. Annabelle had disappeared, presumably into her room. Another little girl appeared, younger than Annabelle. No, thanks, replied Nina. It's too late for me. Too late for you because you're dying or too late for you for some other reason? Asked the little girl, interestedly. This is Claire, said her mother. Try and ignore her. Yes, said Claire, smiling at Nina like an angel, you can try. I meant it was too late for caffeine, it will keep me awake. Really? My mom drinks it all the time. But she's much older than you, so maybe she's more tired. People's bodies wear out, you know. She reminded Nina of Ramona Quimby, with her shiny little bob and big brown eyes. Not to mention her apparent lack of filter. Lily sighed. I think they're doing a biology project on decomposition or something. She's all about death right now. Did you know, said Claire, ignoring her mother, that you have tiny insects living on your eyelashes, right now, eating your eyelash juice? Nina raised her eyebrows. This kid had picked the wrong target. Yes, she said, and not only on your eyelashes, the adult face has 1,000 or so mites living on it at any one time. Did you also know, she asked Claire, that the entire world is covered in a microscopic layer of poop? Yes, said Claire, and did you know that tapeworms can grow 80 feet long? Yes, and did you know people produce a liter of snot every day? On a regular day, said Claire, with relish. And did you know the shiny coating on jelly beans is made from insect poop? She paused. Or it used to be. I don't know if it still is. Nina nodded, but Lily was done with this conversation. That's enough, she said. Honestly, you're revolting, Claire. I'm not, said Claire. I'm learning. She went closer to Nina. Who are you? I'm Nina. I work at the bookstore where your sister does her book club. Claire considered this. Do you have a book club for littler kids? How old are you? 6. No, not yet. When you're older you can join one. Claire narrowed her eyes at Nina, as her older sister had done. If we can read, we should be able to come. You might be bored. Claire shrugged. I'm willing to take that risk, she said. Lily had finished putting away the groceries. Time to get crafty, she said, and led the way to the living room. Claire trailed after them. Lily spoke over her shoulder. I have an office in the garage, but I've been doing this stuff in here so I can watch TV at the same time. Is that okay? Nina nodded and Lily pulled out a basket containing a load of seed packets, each of which was different. They were all painted with flowers, and names had been worked into leaves and petals, vines and twigs. They were gorgeous. Where did you get these? They're great. Nina turned them over in her hands. Lily smiled. I made them. I'm an illustrator. These guests are confirmed, so now I need to thread this piece of ribbon here, she demonstrated, and then add an extra sealing sticker on the back flap here so the packets don't burst open. The seeds are really, really small. Like poppy seeds. Exactly like. They're California poppies. Cute. Inexpensive. Lily grinned. But also cute. Can I help, too? Asked Claire. You're supposed to be getting ready for bed. This looks more fun. Lily considered her younger daughter for a moment, then smiled. Sure, you can do the stickers. They sat in a circle and started working. Nina asked, So, who's getting married? My auntie, answered Claire, while her mother's mouth was still opening. She's marrying a man she met in the street. Nina looked at Lily, who was shaking her head. My sister Rachel met her fiancé at the Grove, but for some reason Claire enjoys embroidering the truth. Maybe you're a writer, Nina said to the little girl. They make up stuff for a living. Really? And it's not lying? Nina shook her head. No, it's called fiction. Huh. Claire looked thoughtful. Anyway, she's marrying Richard, who's very nice and tall. Do you mean nicely tall, like, he's nice and tall, meaning really tall, or nice and also tall? Claire looked at her and frowned. Never mind, said Nina. He's very tall, Claire said slowly, and he's also nice. And he has a dog, too, and he makes my auntie laugh all the time, almost as much as my mom does. Nina glanced at Lily, who was working on a blank seed packet with some watercolor pens. You and your sister are close. Super close. Lily was focused on her work, but continued. She's my best friend, which is why I don't want to mess up her wedding by forgetting anyone. And she keeps randomly inviting more people. Well, that definitely makes it harder. Lily sighed and waved the packet to dry it. She's very friendly. She'd be happy if total strangers came, honestly, she isn't paying that much attention. I think if it had been up to her she would have eloped. She had a big wedding the first time she got married. She turned her head and pretended to spit on the ground, which made Nina jump. Sorry, family tradition, her first husband was a loser. Anyway, she had the big wedding, and the marriage was a disaster, every day of the 5 weeks it lasted. So she's superstitious about it. She left it up to me. Did you have a fancy wedding? There was a tiny pause, then Lily nodded. Pretty fancy. My dad is dead, piped up Claire. Oh, said Nina. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No problem, said the child. I don't think it matters anymore. It's always going to matter, honey, but it's been a long time. Lily didn't look up from her painting, but Nina could hear wistfulness in her voice. Sam in my class has no dad, either. Claire was clearly pursuing this topic. Lily raised her eyebrows at her daughter. Sam has 2 moms. Bethany has no dad. She does, her parents aren't together anymore, but she still has a dad. Totally different. Divorce is not the same as someone dying, honey. Why not? They're still gone. Nina realized Claire must have been very young when her dad died, and didn't have memories of him. She hoped Lily wasn't finding this difficult to talk about. She busied herself with her ribbons. Not really. Even if they aren't very nice, they're still around. Once someone has died, that's it. All gone. There was a pause while Claire considered this. Then, Mom has a new boyfriend now, anyway. Edward. He's even taller than Richard, and even nicer. He brought me a tiny house for the garden. Do you want to see? When we're done, sure. Nina grinned at Claire. You seem very interested in how tall people are. Nina was happy to change the subject. Claire looked at her in surprise. Of course. I'm 43 inches tall. Then she suddenly got up and walked out of the room. I'm going to go and write a book now, she said. Bye, Nina. See you at the wedding. With a thump, Frank the dog jumped off the sofa where he had been sleeping and lazily followed Claire. Perhaps he was going to give notes. An hour later they were done. Lily had taken Nina's suggestion and made half a dozen that said favored guest, in case her sister invited a few more guests at the last minute, and still had 20 packets in her basket. The wedding is a week from Saturday, so she's still got time to add people, and she can't be trusted. Lily was leaning back against the sofa, holding a glass of wine. Nina had one, too, and they were feeling pretty full of themselves. The finished seed packets looked beautiful, a rainbow of ribbons and flowers. Don't they need you to lock numbers at some point? We overestimated, in case. What else are you doing for the wedding? Are there centerpieces? Lily shook her head. No, it's a picnic wedding. Nina raised her eyebrows. What if it rains? Lily turned up her hands. We can go inside the conservatory, I guess, where the ceremony is happening, but it's the end of May in Los Angeles. The internet says the chance of rain is about 1%, and Rachel was happy with those odds. She said she wanted people to sprawl at her wedding, and sprawl they will. How will it work? Nina enjoyed the concept of weddings, although she was getting seriously sick of going to other people's. Lily stretched. We rented a load of big rugs, all different kinds, from a prop house, and we're going to lay them out on the grass and surround them with the few hundred assorted pillows we also rented. She looked at Nina. You really are interested in organization. Nina shrugged. I like pinning things down. I like to know in advance, I like to prepare. Lily looked at the younger woman, and her smile was warm. You know, you can't always be ready. Life tends toward chaos, sadly. I thought I had my life all planned out nicely, and then my husband died in a car accident and everything changed completely. It's all very well to have a plan, it's a good idea, but you have to be able to walk away from it if you need to. And you walked away from yours? Lily finished her wine. I'm not sure walk is the right verb, but I left it behind. That version of it, anyway. More wine? She got up and went into the kitchen. When she came back, she was clearly ready to change the subject. So, why does Annabelle hold such a poor opinion of your flirting? She handed Nina her refilled wineglass and sat back down on the floor. Nina blushed. She and the other girls saw a friend of mine come to the store and decided we were flirting. You weren't? Nina sighed. Not successfully. But this is someone you like? I don't know him at all. Nina paused. But yes, he's attractive. I'm not sure he's very smart. He seems to know a lot about sports but nothing about books. Lily frowned. And that matters. Is book smart the only smart that counts? Nina shrugged. To me, I guess, which I realize isn't very open-minded. I love books, they're my job, my main interest. I'm not very sporty. Lily looked skeptical. So is the issue that he's not bookish, or that you're not sporty? Maybe there's something you're both interested in. Movies? Animals? Entomology? Nina sighed and stretched out on the floor, gazing at the ceiling. There was a clump of something pink up there. Is that Play-Doh? Lily didn't even look. Probably. You're going to have to go out with him, I guess, to find out whether or not you're compatible. She paused. Do you young people actually date anymore, or do you run algorithms to see if it's going to work? Nina smiled. Yeah, we have our phones talk to each other and see if our operating systems are compatible. Saves so much time and effort. She added, and why you're calling me you young people, when you're probably all of 3 or 4 years older than me, I'm not sure. Lily smiled. Yeah, but those are mom years, they're like dog years, 7 for everyone. Chronologically, I'm 34, but in mom years, I'm 9 to 4. Well, then you look great for 9 to 4. Thanks. Can't you stalk him online? I thought you guys all did that. I guess. I don't know his last name. Lily laughed and dragged her laptop over. Well, what do you know about him? I know he's on a trivia team that beat my team the week before last. With a question on horse racing, for crying out loud. Did you know that all racehorses have the same birthday? Lily nodded absently. Yes, January 1st. Nina threw up her hands. Does everyone know this fact except me? Lily ignored her. Here we go. There's a site that lists all the trivia teams in the East Los Angeles Pub League. Is that your league? Nina nodded. And what's his team name? You're a quizzard, Harry. Lily looked over at her and made a face. Really? And you think he's not bookish? Oh, said Nina, good point. Not sure that being a Potter fan makes you bookish, per se, but I suppose it does mean he can read. Are you criticizing Harry Potter? Never. I'm a Ravenclaw. A bookworm like you. What a surprise. Lily was scrolling down a page of some kind, the screen hidden from view. Here it is. Team members. She paused and frowned suddenly. Thomas Burns. Burns like Edward or Burns like David Byrne? The latter. With AY. Lily was still frowning. That's bizarre. Why? Lily didn't answer, and then looked up and smiled suddenly. Nothing, I got distracted. She closed the computer. So now you know his name, you can stalk him to your heart's content. I don't know if that's really my scene. You're lying. Lily grabbed one of the blank seed packets and started working on it. Yes, I'm lying, Nina said. But I'm not in the market for dating right now. Things are pretty tight, time-wise, and I have my life together and organized, and I think a boyfriend might be too much. She started babbling. Besides, I don't know if I can manage the Instagram-worthy relationship, with its photo opportunities and matching sweaters and public declarations. I find it hard enough to relate to people in private, having to do that while also creating an effective online presence as a couple. Lily looked at her, her hands still for a moment. You do realize it isn't mandatory to live your life online, right? For thousands of years we managed to be miserable or joyful in private. You can still do it. Nina shrugged. Sure. But even in private, being with someone else feels like. She trailed off. It feels intrusive. She thought of something else. Besides, I have this whole other thing going on. She told Lily about her family, about her dad, while Lily drew and said, millimeter him, every so often. Eventually Nina said, besides, Even if I didn't have a new cast of thousands to deal with, what would that guy and I talk about once we'd finished discussing Harry Potter? He's probably only seen the movies anyway. You're a snob, there's nothing wrong with the movies, and I think that whole thing is an excuse to avoid dealing with it, replied Lily, turning the seed packet over and looking at it. She held it up to Nina. How's this one? The packet had the name Nina on it, written in vines, surrounded by amber poppies. It's beautiful. Good, said Lily, because it's for you. You're coming to the wedding. I'm not invited. You are now. Claire invited you. And she doesn't like to be crossed. That's true, said a voice from the doorway. Claire was standing there, holding several sheets of paper, with her editor, Frank. I finished my book and I'm ready for bed. Then she looked at Nina. You can come to the wedding, but you can't sit with me until after the ceremony, because I am a flower girl, and that is a series of responsibilities. Nina opened her mouth but closed it again. Thanks very much, she said. You can thank me after, said Lily, getting to her feet. Assuming you have a good time. Nina laughed, getting up, too, and dusting herself off. She seemed to have acquired a pretty thick layer of dog fur, lying on the floor. Oh well, it was a chilly night. Besides, added Lily, walking her to the door, weddings are great places to meet people. Then she and Claire stood at the door and waved goodbye to Nina. 11. In which Nina meets more family, and wishes she hadn't. The next morning, Nina got a text message, Danger, Will Robinson. Expect call from Saki. See you later. It was from Peter Reynolds, and it made her frown. She was having her morning planner time when the text came in, and she looked over her day carefully. Was there space for illegal assault? Not really. And if there wasn't space, it wasn't going to happen. A schedule was a schedule, people, and without a proper schedule, the day would descend into madness, anarchy, dogs and cats living together, etc. The Ghostbusters reference reminded her of another Bill Murray movie, Stripes, where he begs his girlfriend not to leave, because all the plants are gonna die. She grinned and flipped ahead to schedule a Bill Murray movie marathon. See? Even in the most organized life there is room for whimsy. It just needs scheduling. As her heroine Monica Geller would say, rules help control the fun. The call from Sarkashian came in a few minutes after the store opened, which was considerate at least. The lawyer sounded somewhat apologetic. I'm afraid to say your niece, Lydia, has raised the specter of legal action against you. She's asked for a face-to-face meeting at our offices today. Would you consider attending? He did sound like he was asking, rather than ordering, so Nina considered it. Legal action for what? Sarkashian coughed. Fraud. She thinks maybe you're not actually a Reynolds. Nina laughed. And did you tell her that I don't care at all about being a Reynolds, and in fact would have been totally fine never knowing who my father was? Yes, but there is the matter of the will. Cut me out of it, then. I really don't care. Sarkashian sounded horrified. You can't simply cut someone out of someone else's will. Besides, it might be a great deal of money. Or it might be a giant inflatable middle finger. Let me be completely clear, I don't care. My life is fine as it is. I don't need any complications. There was a moment's silence. Then, well, I know that, and you know that, but perhaps you could tell Lydia that in person. Please, Ms. Hill, it would be enormously helpful if you could attend the meeting. The rest of your immediate family will be there. So that was why Peter had given her the heads up. He already knew about the meeting. I'll see you later. Thank you. The lawyer did sound relieved, and Nina wondered what he was scared of. My assistant will contact you with details. Damn it. Now she was going to have to change her planner. Nina hated changing her planner. The lawyer's office was in a glintingly tall glass and granite building on the corner of Wilshire and Crescent Heights. While not exactly forbidding and board-like, it was dark enough that should a battalion of stormtroopers have emerged from the parking lot, Nina wouldn't have been surprised. Well, she would have been surprised by the stormtroopers per se, obviously, but it would have made sense they were coming from that building. The point is, the lawyer's building was intimidating and Nina was intimidated. While the firm didn't have their name on the outside of the building, a quick glance at the lobby directory showed they had 3 floors all to themselves, which meant this was no podunk operation, no, sir. The receptionist was clearly on top of her game, because when Nina walked up to her, she rose and said, "Right this way, Ms. Hill." "How did you know who I was?" Nina asked. She should have shrugged it off, but she was rattled. See earlier comment re, stormtroopers. The receptionist smiled at her as she headed down a long and plushly carpeted corridor. "I have a list of people attending your meeting, which is the only one involving clients right now, and I signed everyone else in already." "Oh," Nina said. "So, professionalism and logic." The woman nodded. "Well played, madam," Nina said, and then wished her head had exploded instead. Why did she say these things? Why did her mouth open and this stuff come out? AIS like Siri and Alexa sounded more relaxed and human than she did. The woman opened a door, but as the sound of many conversations rolled out, Nina hesitated. "I think there might be a mistake." Mr. Sarkashian said it was immediate family only. The room was filled with people. Enough food had been laid out on a deep shelf on one end of the room to feed a football team. After the game. The receptionist shook her head. "No mistake. This is the immediate family." She moved her head slightly to indicate Nina should go in because she was holding the door and it was heavy, so Nina stepped into the room. Nina had always been comfortable with the fact that she was not gregarious. Not every interaction needed to be a party, right? Her room 101, for those Orwell fans among you, would simply contain a couple of people whose names she couldn't remember. Walking into a room full of strangers was about as comfortable for her as putting on a hat full of wasps and tugging it down firmly. But in she went. "Nina." Peter stood and came over to her. He took her hand and leaned in close. "Don't pay any attention to this, let it wash over you." He pulled back a bit and looked at her, smiling. "Lydia is not speaking for most of us." Nina nodded, and caught sight of Archie over his shoulder. He was also smiling at her, so maybe this wouldn't be so bad. She took a seat in the total silence that had fallen and felt several pairs of eyes trained on her. She tried the in through the nose, out through the mouth breathing a long-ago therapist had suggested. The table was very nice, so she looked at that. Spruce, if she wasn't mistaken. "Would you like a glass of wine?" asked Peter. "It's terrible, but there's alcohol in it." Nina nodded, and he got her a glass that, as he had warned, was pretty bad. Nina wasn't a wine snob or anything, but she was a millennial, and as you've probably heard, they drink more wine than any generation in history. This would probably be disputed by the ancient Romans, but the internet doesn't check sources very thoroughly. Nina had a policy of treating the internet the way she might treat a guy in a bar, one who's wavering gently on his stool and holding a honey mustard pretzel nugget. He might be an expert in international arbitrage or arms dealing or the history of Catholicism, but it's more likely he isn't. But anyway, she did drink wine, so the internet nailed that one. Sarkashian arrived and threw a haunch of dead lamb on the table, and the lion feeding began. The haunch came in the form of a pile of documents, but still. "Thank you all for coming," he said, in time-honored style. "I'd like to take a minute now to introduce everyone to Nina Hill." He indicated her, and she looked around and smiled the smallest, tightest smile in the history of smiles, which, when you consider geopolitical world history, is saying quite a lot. "I am not happy," said the smile, but I am willing to be polite for as long as you all are. What it also said, if you knew Nina well, was, I am starting to have a panic attack, so please can we move this along before I throw up on the table. But no one there knew her well, so her secret was safe. The lawyer went around the table. Let's start with your siblings. This is Becky Oliver, she was William Reynolds's first child. The woman was maybe in her late 50s. She looked a lot like her son, Peter, and her smile was like his, too. She held up her hand in a peace sign, which Nina took to be a gesture of, well, peace. The woman on her right is your sister Catherine, and on her left is their mother, Alice. Alice's eyes were fixed on Nina, but she might have been stuffed for all the animation she showed. She had one of those hairstyles that looked like it could be removed in one piece, possibly in order to replace it with an identical one in a different color. She favored statement jewelry, but what her statement was, it was difficult to say, unless it was simply, I am a hollow shell of a person, which is fine with me, because my shell is shinier than yours. That statement came across loud and clear. Nina remembered Peter's warning about Alice and tried not to look directly at her. Catherine was different. She wore zero makeup and clearly gave less than zero fucks about her appearance. Her hair was messy, her clothes were untidy, but her eyes were as sharp and penetrating as a robin getting ready to ambush a worm. Nina was painfully aware she was the worm in this situation. The lawyer swallowed and moved on. To their right is Archie, who I think you've already met, and his wife, Becca. He is the son of Rosie, William's second wife, sadly deceased. Hello again, said Archie. Sorry about this. Shut up, Archie, said a younger woman who was sitting exactly across from Nina. Don't be such a quisling. She switchbladed a glance at him, then looked back at Nina, unblinking. She was in her mid-30s, maybe, wearing a violet pantsuit with one of those blouses that have a bow for a tie. Possibly she thought she was attending a meeting in 1986, or interviewing for a job as a minor character on LA Law. Wow, thought Nina, quisling, eh? Bringing out the 50-cent insults already. Respect. Although if the woman didn't blink soon, her shiny little eyes were going to drop out of their sockets and roll across the table like marbles. The lawyer sped up his introductions. Your youngest sibling, Millie, isn't here, but sitting next to Becca is Eliza, who is Millie's mother and William's widow. Eliza smiled tightly at her, but whether the tightness was for her or a general default setting, Nina had no idea. Alice suddenly leaned forward and pointed at Eliza. She killed him, you know, so I suggest you watch yourself. Come between her and the gold she's been digging, and you might not live to regret it. Eliza snorted. You're mistaken, Alice. And possibly senile. I'm not, replied Alice. I'm simply too old to make nice if I don't want to. You killed William so you could take his money. Sarkashian interrupted. Please, Alice, that's slander and completely baseless. Alice looked at Eliza. Murdering whore. Emasculating harpy, replied Eliza, calmly. Ladies, muttered the lawyer, clearly used to this level of familial invective. He frowned at them, cleared his throat, and continued. Okay, now we come to nieces and nephews. Peter you already know, and sitting next to him is his sister, Jennifer. Jennifer looked like Peter and waved a friendly hand. Jennifer has children who are your great-nieces and great-nephew, but they're younger and not legally required to be here. Am I legally required to be here? Nina looked at Sarkashian. I thought it was just an invitation. It was, he replied quickly. I simply meant that they are legally still minors, and therefore not party to any action. Nina frowned at him, but before she could ask anything else, the woman across from her snapped, and I'm your niece Lydia, your sister Catherine's daughter, although I doubt we're actually related at all. She looked aggressively at Nina. What proof do you have that my grandfather was your father, and that you're not a con artist. Nina gazed at her for a beat or two, then slowly raised one eyebrow, a skill she was rightly proud of. If this woman thought she could intimidate her by being rude, she was about to be disappointed. Nina might battle crippling anxiety once or twice a week, but she also worked in retail, and rudeness is the special sauce on the burger that is the Los Angeles shopping public. Oh, I don't know. My birth certificate. His own word? My mother's word. Lydia smiled like the meanest girl in school about to comment on some underling's shoe choice. Well, that's hardly sufficient, is it? Legally it is, said Sarkisian, briskly. William Reynolds is listed on her birth certificate. He made provision for her in his will, proving that he was aware of her existence, and her mother has confirmed that he was her father. As far as the law is concerned, we're good. Well, who's to say she is actually who she says she is? Lydia looked scornful. She might be some grifter pretending to be Nina Hill to get her hands on our money. She may have kidnapped the real Nina Hill and be keeping her in a basement somewhere. At this, the last remnants of Nina's anxiety peeled away, revealing a cold center of anger. This wasn't necessarily a good thing. Sometimes when her social anxiety got pushed too far, a strange confident madness would take over her mouth, which had led to some very unfortunate outcomes. Well, she said, apparently completely nonchalant, if I am a grifter, I've been playing a very long con, seeing as I went to school as Nina Hill, went to college as Nina Hill, got a job as Nina Hill, and have been working at it for 6 years, still pretending to be a totally unimportant and regular person. Presumably in case someone I'd never heard of dropped dead and left me a mysterious something. She turned up her palms. It's a lovely blend of cynicism and optimism, but as a con it seems a little high intensity, don't you think? Several people laughed, but Lydia didn't seem amused. Also, continued Nina, I didn't approach you guys, you came to me. I had no idea who my father was. He could have been anyone. Is your mother a prostitute? Lydia asked. Nina paused. No, she replied evenly, I didn't mean it that way. She's a news photographer. She won a Pulitzer. Lois Lane won a Pulitzer, and she's a fictional character. Nina happened to know that was true, and for a split second recognized that Lydia, for all her arseholery, was a kindred trivia spirit. However, any fellow feeling quickly dissipated when Lydia kept talking. Where is your slutty single mother now? She's in China. Convenient. Not if you want to hand her something. Eliza spoke up from the end of the table. This whole thing is ridiculous. If William left this woman something, isn't that an end to it? He could have left anything to anyone, right? She turned and looked at Nina. I didn't kill him, by the way. He died of a heart attack after years of smoking, drinking, and eating red meat with almost every meal. She turned up her palms. He stopped all that when we met, but the damage was done. You brainwashed him, said Lydia. He became a vegetarian. He tried to talk me into doing a juice cleanse. It was horrible. Nina raised her eyebrows and looked at Sarkisian. Is there any question about my father's death? Yes, the question is whether he was your father or not, spat Lydia. No, said Sarkisian, rolling his eyes. There is no question. As Eliza correctly says, he was in his 70s and died of a heart attack. Eliza was staring at Lydia. You barely knew your grandfather, Lydia. I'm not sure how you think you know anything about his health. When was the last time you visited him? She was elegant in every way, this woman, pale blonde hair, grey cashmere wrap over charcoal cashmere sweater, layers of gold necklaces and bracelets, but she was also irritated in a very human and somewhat ruffled way. Possibly because she was having to confront an insane ex-wife and a stepdaughter who was at least half basilisk. You wouldn't let any of us visit him. You kept him hidden away so you could poison his mind against us. It was remarkable how much anger Lydia was cramming into every syllable, while at the same time keeping a pretty even tone. Peter finally joined the conversation. "Lydia, darling, this isn't a telenovela. It's amazing William lasted that long, to be honest, and attacking his widow is both tasteless and unattractive." Eliza loved William. Lydia whipped around. "Peter, you have no idea what's attractive in a woman, so keep your nose out of it." "Really?" said Archie. "Now you're attacking Peter?" Lydia pointed her finger angrily at him. "Archie, stay out of this. You shouldn't even be here. You get more money than any of us. Why do you care?" Archie flushed. "You mean because my mother is dead? Yeah, it's a great trade. You might be happy to exchange your mother for cold, hard cash, but Becca and I..." And suddenly everyone was talking at once, and none of it was very nice. "Oh, for God's sake," said Nina loudly, bringing the argument to a sudden halt. "You're all mad. I'm not coming to the wool reading, I don't want anything he left me, and goodbye." Lydia looked smug. The lawyer looked worried. Everyone else looked embarrassed. Nina got up and left the room, making it out into the fresh air before she ran out of oxygen completely. She leaned against the building and slowly slid down until she was sitting on the sidewalk. She put her head between her knees and waited until normal service was resumed. She was going to go home and have a brandy, and change her phone number, and possibly her name, in order to be done with the Reynolds family. She just fervently hoped they were done with her.